Hi guys. Tonight we are heading deep into the Egyptian desert, where the air bakes you by day and freezes you by night. You stand beneath a sky so wide and so black it almost swallows you whole, scattered with stars so sharp they look like they could slice your skin if you reached up to touch them. The wind that sweeps across the dunes is no longer hot. Instead, it feels like a whip of ice across your cheeks. Your teeth chatter as you realize the cruel truth. This desert, which can scorch the soles of your feet at noon, now feels like the inside of an ice chest. And without gas, without electricity, without even the thin insulation you take for granted in your modern walls, you probably won't survive this without clever tricks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time down in the comments. It's always fun to imagine all of us drifting off to sleep together across the world. Now, dim the lights. You press your sandals into the cooling sand, hearing the faint crunch as if you are walking on ground dusted with frost. The Nile Valley behind you still holds the faint scent of wet mud, of fish, of cut reeds drying in the sunday. But here, in the expanse of shifting dunes, the night carries a metallic silence, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of wind. Your fingers twitch as you pull your linen robe tighter, though linen is hardly enough. That cloth, so breezy and perfect for surviving the blaze of the day, now feels paper-thin against the chill. A mainstream fact is that deserts, particularly the Sahara, and its surrounding edges where ancient Egypt thrived, lose heat at night with terrifying speed. The daytime sun superheats the sand, and then, once the sun dips, the dry air has nothing to trap the warmth. Temperatures can plunge by 20, sometimes 30 degrees within just a few hours. For ancient Egyptians, who spent so much of their lives outside, this was not an abstract meteorological concept, it was survival. You picture yourself trudging toward a small mudbrick house, its rough surface glowing faintly under moonlight. These mudbricks were made of Nile mud mixed with straw, packed into wooden molds, and baked hard under the very sun that now feels like a distant memory. The quirky part? The same bricks, which baked villagers half to death in summer, were also their shield against icy desert nights. Walls half a meter thick stored warmth from the day, and slowly released it as the air turned frigid. Historians often marvel at how such simple materials created microclimates inside these houses that made sleep not only possible but bearable. Still, scholars continue to debate whether every Egyptian slept indoors. Some argue that many common folk, especially in summer, preferred rooftops under the stars, while others claim this was more of a seasonal or wealth-related choice. Imagine rolling out a reed mat on a flat mud roof and drifting off under Orion's belt, only to scramble back inside when the night wind grew too sharp to handle. The sensory details surround you, the smell of dust mingled with animal dung, the soft crackle of palm fronds tied to a doorway, the low murmur of voices huddled inside for warmth. You slip through the threshold, ducking your head, and the cool clay air enfolds you. Not warm exactly, but not the biting cold outside either. A flickering lamp carved from stone, filled with oil and a wick, pushes back the shadows. Its glow is golden, almost honey-like, softening the hard edges of the walls. The flame hums faintly, casting heat you feel if you hover close. It's not much, but when your skin is desperate for comfort, even the smallest warmth feels luxurious. The family inside watches you shuffle in. They are wrapped in layered garments, children leaning against parents like small birds pressing together for warmth. The father shifts aside a woven mat on the floor, dust rises, and he gestures to you. It is a thin cushion stuffed with papyrus fibers. You lower yourself onto it, feeling the uneven texture, the faint crackle of dry reeds beneath your weight. It's not soft, but at least it lifts you off the cold, packed earth. The air smells faintly sweet. Papyrus always carries a sharp, grassy perfume, a reminder of the Nile even out here. Closing your eyes, you listen. The occasional cough, the shuffle of a goat tethered in a corner, the low whisper of the wind pressing against the walls. For a fleeting moment, you realize how fragile this bubble of comfort island outside. The desert wants you gone. Inside, human ingenuity fights back with mud, straw, fire, and togetherness. And the night drags on, hour by hour, until the first blush of dawn slowly restores the warmth you've been longing for. You may shiver, but you're alive. And the Egyptians of 4,000 years ago were, too, because they mastered the art of surviving the coldest desert nights without a spark of modern power. You stir awake in the dark, still bundled in linen, feeling how the chill lingers on your skin. The fire in the courtyard embers has long gone cold, leaving the room dependent on its thick mudbrick walls. They cradle the heat captured during daylight, but even that stored warmth thins out by the time midnight stretches its long arms. You pull the cloth tighter across your shoulders, wondering how anyone could live like this night after night. The answer lies right in the very material surrounding you: mudbrick. A mainstream fact about ancient Egypt is that nearly every village and city was built primarily from mudbrick. Limestone and sandstone may have been the stones of kings, monuments, temples, and pyramids, but common people's daily survival rested on bricks made from silt and straw. Each brick was a piece of the Nile, hardened by sunlight, stacked one atop another until walls were half a meter thick. These walls acted like primitive batteries, storing the sun's energy in the day and releasing it slowly at night. Step outside into the raw desert, and you feel your bones freeze. Step back inside, and you feel a pocket of stored heat. You sit on the floor, running your hand over the rough texture of the wall. Tiny straw fibers scratch your fingers. The smell of earth lingers faintly, like rain on dry soil. You imagine workers kneading wet clay with their feet, mixing chopped straw into it, pressing the mush into wooden molds, and then laying the bricks out beneath the summer sun until they hardened. Such bricks rarely lasted more than a generation, melting back into the soil during floods or storms. But they were cheap, abundant, and endlessly replaceable. A quirky tidbit emerges here. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient Egyptian bricks stamped with royal names, not for luxury, but for bureaucracy. Imagine sleeping inside a wall pressed with the cartouche of a pharaoh, his name imprinted into your very home. For the villager, it was less about reverence and more about necessity. A stamped brick kept out the night's bite, just as well as an anonymous one. But historians still debate whether the heat-trapping effect was enough for true comfort. Some scholars insist mudbrick interiors could remain warm through most of the night, while others argue that once midnight arrived, the chill penetrated regardless, forcing families to rely on additional measures. Perhaps the truth is in between. The walls delayed the cold's arrival, buying sleepers just enough time to drift into their deepest slumber before waking to the morning's grey chill. You glance upward at the low ceiling. Smoke stains darken the mud surface, evidence that torches or oil lamps once flickered here night after night. The ceiling dips close enough to trap warmth, but high enough that you don't feel smothered. The smell of soot clings to the air, mixing with the faint musk of animals, goats, and chickens often shared these homes, their body heat contributing to the ambient temperature. You wrinkle your nose, but then laugh quietly. Survival rarely smells sweet. The sensory play continues. Your bare feet touch the packed dirt floor, cool and slightly damp, and you quickly tuck them beneath the reed mat again. Against the wall, a clay jar of water sits sealed with woven fiber. The water, pulled from the Nile earlier in the day, now tastes almost icy, a reminder of how fast the desert can drain away heat. You take a sip, shiver at the coldness on your teeth, and marvel at the irony. By day you beg for cool water, by night it becomes another bite of cold you must resist. Step outside with me again. The moonlight glazes the desert, turning dunes into silver waves. The wind roars faintly, and every gust feels like a knife across your cheek. In the distance, a jackal yips. Your breath fogs faintly, something you didn't expect in Egypt. a land you normally picture as sun-scorched. Yet here it is, real and harsh. It's no wonder the Egyptians took such care to build communities that clustered homes tightly together. Houses leaned against each other like friends sharing body heat. Narrow alleyways minimized drafts, making entire neighborhoods function like giant thermal pockets. Imagine winding through such alleys at night, walls closing in close enough that your elbows brush them, while above, flat rooftops hide families huddled under linen and wool. The whole village breathes together, sighing through the cold, waiting for dawn. Another thought drifts in. Mudbrick homes weren't eternal. After floods or time eroded them, the bricks returned to the soil, leaving only outlines behind. Modern archaeologists often find little more than ghostly foundations. And yet, despite their fragility, those bricks were enough to carry countless families through thousands of cold desert nights. Picture yourself lying once more against the wall. You trace the cracks with your fingers, feeling the cool clay flake beneath your nail. The surface is dusty, but behind it, the core holds warmth that radiates slowly into your palm. Your eyelids droop. Outside, the desert remains merciless. Inside, you at least have a fighting chance. That was the genius of the mud-brick house. Not grandeur, not perfection, but survival. You yawn and curl tighter into your blanket of linen. Somewhere in the dark, a rooster stirs prematurely, tricked by starlight into thinking dawn has arrived. The family around you murmurs softly in their dreams, shifting under layers of cloth. You smile faintly, realizing that even in the harshest climates, humans have always found a way to make night survivable. And so you drift back into uneasy sleep, warmed not by luxury, but by mud, straw, and the wisdom of generations who understood that the desert was not conquered, it was merely negotiated with, one brick at a time. The first rooster's crow is only a false alarm, and you sink back into drowsiness. But the cold floor keeps reminding you that rest never comes easy in this desert. The reed mat beneath your body crackles faintly each time you shift your weight, and the uneven texture presses into your back. Yet, for the ancient Egyptians, even a thin mat made of reeds or palm fibers was a crucial barrier between skin and soil. Sleeping directly on bare earth meant surrendering body warmth to the ground, the same way water drains away from cupped hands. Elevation, even by a finger's breadth, could make the difference between waking shivering or waking refreshed. A mainstream fact is that reeds from the Nile were among Egypt's most versatile resources. Papyrus is famous for becoming scrolls, but countless other reed species were woven into mats, baskets, sandals, and bedding. Archaeologists have uncovered fragments of woven reed mats in tombs, some still bearing the faint impressions of human use. They may look crude compared to your modern mattress, but when layered, dried, and tightly woven, they provided not only cushioning, but also insulation. Think of them as an ancient thermal pad, protecting the sleeper from the cold breath of the earth. You run your hand across the mat's surface, and tiny broken fibers cling to your fingertips, leaving behind a faint grassy scent, even after millennia. The sound of your movement is soft but distinct, a dry whisper, like parchment rubbed against parchment. In the silence of night, such whispers become amplified, filling the small room as if the mat itself is speaking. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some wealthier Egyptians went beyond plain mats, commissioning carved wooden bed frames strung with cords, over which mats or textiles were laid. These beds lifted sleepers further from the ground, protecting them from drafts and scorpions alike. One such bed, belonging to Queen Hetepheres, mother of Khufu, was discovered disassembled in her burial chamber. Its gold-covered legs and intricate construction remind you that for the elite, even sleep was a realm of artistry. But for common villagers, a reed mat on the floor, sometimes doubled or tripled for added thickness, was the nightly solution. Still, scholars continue to debate how widespread elevated sleeping was. Some argue that most ordinary people never owned a frame, citing the scarcity of wood in Egypt and the cost of importing cedar from Lebanon. Others suggest that simple rope-strung frames might have been common, given their practicality against insects and rodents. The absence of preserved examples could simply be because humble wood disintegrated over time, while royal furniture endured in sealed tombs. The truth remains hazy, like moonlight filtered through desert dust. As you shift your position again, you notice how even a thin mat creates a pocket of trapped air beneath you. That cushion reduces heat loss, and your body, though still chilled, begins to accept the trade-off. It is not comfort by your modern standards, but it is survivable. You imagine a child curling beside you, their small body radiating warmth against your arm, while another sibling wedges against your other side. Suddenly, the cold seems less biting. The mat has done its part, and now the closeness of others completes the shield. Step outside for a moment with me. In the distance, across the Nile floodplain, you see small silhouettes of workers returning late from fields, carrying bundles of reeds to be dried and stored. These will later be split, woven, and tied into mats and bedding. The smell of freshly cut reeds, sharp and wet, mixes with the damp scent of river mud. In this world, even sleep begins with agriculture, with the rhythm of harvests. Without these reeds, nights would be far crueler. The sensory contrast sharpens your awareness. The mat's surface beneath your cheek feels rougher than cloth, the individual fibers scratching like straw. Yet, compared to the unyielding ground, it is forgiving. The faint fragrance of dried reeds drifts upward, oddly soothing, like a rustic incense. In your half-dreaming state, you imagine you are lying in a field of papyrus by the river, dragonflies humming overhead, instead of huddled in a dark mudbrick room. You reflect for a moment. Isn't it strange that comfort can be relative? In your world, mattresses carry coils, memory foam, climate control, and endless marketing slogans. But here, a simple mat weaved by hand transforms survival into rest. It is a reminder that human ingenuity is not always about invention, but about adaptation. When resources are few, survival comes from transforming what is abundant reeds, papyrus, palm fiber, into shields against the desert's bite. And when you consider it, doesn't the act of weaving itself feel symbolic? Each strand crossing over another, creating strength from fragility, mirrors how families wove themselves together at night, binding warmth with closeness. A mat alone is thin, but layered with others, it becomes substantial. A person alone shivers, but nestled within a family, warmth multiplies. Both patterns, woven reeds and woven people, tell the same story of survival. You roll once more, listening as the mat rustles beneath you. Outside, the wind scours the dunes, but you feel insulated from its violence. Somewhere beyond the walls, a desert fox darts across the sand, leaving tiny prints that will be erased by dawn. The stars wheel silently overhead, indifferent to human discomfort, but inside, you have a small victory. You are not lying bare against the ground. You are lifted, however slightly, by human effort, and that makes all the difference. And so, as your breathing slows again, the mat becomes more than just a surface. It becomes a bridge between earth and body, between cold and warmth, between fragility and endurance. You close your eyes, drifting into the soft, uneven darkness of Egyptian night, knowing that survival often comes down to something as simple as a mat woven from reeds by the river. The night lingers, and as you curl deeper into the folds of cloth, you realize how vital fabric itself has always been to survival. Without gas or heaters, your body becomes its own furnace, and what you wear or cover yourself with determines how much of that hard-earned heat you keep. In Egypt, the conversation around fabric was not simply about fashion or ceremony. It was about life itself on nights when the desert stripped away warmth as fast as breath fogging into air. It is well established in history that linen was the dominant textile in Egypt for thousands of years. Woven from the fibers of flax plants, it was light, smooth, and incredibly breathable. In the furnace of the midday sun, linen saved lives. But as you know by now, What blesses you in summer can betray you in winter. Linen alone offered little insulation. It fluttered like paper in the night wind. People had to improvise, layering cloth, combining different fibers, or reusing garments as blankets to turn linen's weakness into strength. Your hand grazes the fabric now. It feels cool, smooth against your palm, like touching water. The scent of natural oil and dust clings faintly to it, reminding you that textiles in antiquity carried the perfume of everyday life. Imagine mothers rubbing oils into cloth to soften it, the gentle squeak of weaving looms in mudbrick workshops, threads creaking as they were tightened. Every fold of linen you clutch carries a story of cultivation, spinning and dyeing, all tied to survival through the seasons. Curiously enough, Egyptians sometimes used wool despite their cultural aversion to it. In temple contexts, wool was often forbidden as impure, yet in domestic life it crept in through trade and necessity. Wool's insulating properties were undeniable. Shepherds on the fringes of the desert wore it. Traders from the Levant brought it, and in the biting cold of night, even linen-loving Egyptians could not always resist its warmth. Researchers continue to puzzle over how widespread wool use actually was. Some argue that it was rare and associated only with foreigners, while others claim it was pragmatic and common in colder months. The surviving textile fragments show both linen and wool, but the balance between them remains unclear. You picture two families, one wrapped in smooth, gleaming linen, shivering through the night, and another cloaked in rough but warm wool, ignoring religious taboos for the sake of comfort. Which of them slept more peacefully? Perhaps the answer is obvious, though pride sometimes resists practicality. Your senses paint the scene. The wool cloak smells faintly of lanolin, a musky, oily odor that lingers no matter how often it is washed. Against your skin it feels rough, prickling, but after a few moments the heat begins to build, wrapping around you like a cocoon. Linen, by contrast, is softer, lighter, more elegant, but the cold seeps through its fibers as easily as water through a sieve. You pull the two fabrics together, layering one over the other, and suddenly your body begins to relax. Survival, after all, is rarely about purity. It is about compromise. Step back for a moment and listen. Outside the mudbrick house, wind rasps across the desert. Palm fronds tied over the doorway rattle softly, like bones in the air. Within the house, children fidget in their sleep, pulling cloaks tighter, rolling closer to their parents. You imagine them wrapped like mummies, not for death but for warmth. Linen, wool, even patched-together cloths from worn tunics. Every scrap finds new purpose once the sun disappears. And then there are the richer families, whose garments were dyed, perfumed, and layered with far more abundance. Imagine slipping into a chamber of a noblewoman, where chests overflow with textiles scented with myrrh and cedar. She might layer fine linen under a thicker mantle, cover herself with a dyed woolen cloak, and sleep upon cushions stuffed with plant fibre. Her bedchamber walls are still the same mudbrick, her oil lamp still flickers against darkness, but her comfort is magnified by luxury. The sensory richness of this thought lingers. You smell crushed indigo dye, earthy and bitter. You feel the smooth, cold slide of linen sheets against skin. You sense the faint perfume of cedar oil rubbed into fabric to protect against moths. Sleep in such a room is still challenged by the night air, but the assault feels less brutal. The poor, however, made do differently. Old clothes became patchwork covers, cloaks doubled as blankets by night, tools by day. Even worn sandals could be tucked under feet to keep toes from touching cold earth. One eccentric custom involved stuffing straw into loose linen sacks, making makeshift mattresses that provided both padding and insulation. Crude? Yes. But warmth? Definitely. Academic voices differ on how much textile households actually owned. Some argue that scarcity forced minimalism. One cloak, one tunic, endlessly repaired. Others suggest that textile production was so central that most families had multiple layers at hand, even if not luxurious. Tomb paintings show weaving workshops humming with activity, which might imply abundance. Yet whether scarce or plentiful, cloth in Egypt was never just about decency. It was about braving the merciless desert night. Now, close your eyes with me. You are lying beneath layered fabric, listening to the faint crackle of reed mats, feeling the breath of children near you, the warmth of wool pressing against your chest. The room is quiet except for wind seeping faintly through cracks, but your body begins to accept the compromise between linen's softness and wool's warmth. Outside, jackals cry into the endless night. Inside, you have at least created a cocoon against them, not of stone, not of fire, but of cloth. And isn't it remarkable? When you think of Egypt, you picture pyramids and temples, colossal monuments to eternity. Yet what truly protected people on a nightly basis was something as humble as a cloak pulled tight around the shoulders. Linen, wool, or scraps patched together fabric was their shield, their quiet technology, their comfort against the cold that no monument could banish. You exhale slowly. The breath warms the fabric near your face, making it damp and slightly heavy but still better than nothing. Somewhere in the dark, a mother whispers, adjusting her child's cover. A father shifts, pulling his wool mantle over his wife's shoulders. Layer by layer, cloth by cloth, the family becomes a fortress against the desert's cruelty. And so, as sleep finally begins to return, you are reminded that even in the harshest climates, survival is not always about towering strength. Sometimes it is about something as simple, as intimate, as a piece of fabric pressed close against your skin. The hours drift on, and you hear the sound of wind moving like an invisible river through the alleys outside. Cold air slithers through every crack, reminding you that the desert never rests. Yet, inside these mud-brick walls, the Egyptians had clever ways of lessening the bite. If cloth and mats formed the first shield, then blocking drafts became the second. You lean back, listening to the soft rustle of woven reed mats pressed against a doorway, and realize that shelter was as much about management of air as it was about warmth. Archaeological records confirm that Egyptians designed homes with practical openings to handle both seasons. In summer, windows and slits allowed air to pass through, cooling the rooms. In winter, those same openings could be plugged with reed bundles, wooden shutters, or even slabs of mud. Palm frond mats often hung over doorways, and when rolled tight against the threshold, they became an ancient draft stopper. Imagine pushing aside such a mat. The faint smell of palm sap, the creak of woven fibers, the dust that tickles your nose. It wasn't airtight, but it slowed the cold wind enough to matter. An unusual little detail surfaces here. Some houses had raised door sills designed not only to keep out sand and snakes, but also to block drafts from sweeping straight inside. Step over the threshold, and you feel it an ankle-high barrier of clay or stone that forces air currents to bend, breaking their icy momentum. Modern builders call it a buffer. The ancients simply called it practical. The question remains open in scholarly discussions about how much Egyptians consciously designed for insulation versus mere convenience. Some experts argue that these features were incidental, while others believe that after centuries of trial and error, Egyptians deliberately constructed homes to tame both heat and cold. The lack of written manuals leaves the truth somewhere in the dust, but the surviving architecture whispers enough clues. Your senses sketch the scene vividly. The mat you lean against has the faint, earthy scent of dried palm leaves, sharp yet comforting. The surface is rough under your hand, scratching lightly like sandpaper. Behind it, the wind presses, and you hear a muffled hiss, as if the desert itself is breathing against your shelter. Inside, the flame of a small lamp flickers uncertainly, its smoke curling upward, staining the low ceiling. Children breathe softly in the background, their snores blending with the rhythm of the wind. Step into the alley for a moment. The narrow passage twists between houses, its walls leaning close like conspirators. These lanes were designed to shade by day, but by night they created still pockets where wind could not rush unchecked. You hear the sound of cloth flapping faintly where a family has hung an extra curtain across the passage to trap warmth. In the dark, such improvisations are nearly invisible, yet they turn whole neighborhoods into collective fortresses against the chill. You touch the wall again, feeling where a gap has been stuffed with straw and mud. The patch is crude, but effective. A faint smell of hay wafts out, oddly pleasant in contrast to the dust. Above you, a rooftop door is shut tight with a wooden plank, its edges sealed with clay. That rooftop will be a sleeping place in summer, but in winter it remains firmly closed, keeping warmth pressed inside like a pot lid on simmer. And then there is the sound. Silence broken only by the groan of wood, the whisper of mats, the distant bark of a dog. In these fragile barriers, you sense the Egyptians' quiet genius. They did not conquer the cold with roaring fires or iron stoves. They managed it with small, thoughtful defenses, door sills, mats, shutters, mud patches that together formed a bulwark. Think of the symbolism for a moment. Warmth, in this landscape, was not a matter of excess but of preservation. Every ounce of heat had to be kept. Every draught had to be blocked. The desert at night was like a thief pressing against your home, and you answered not with battle but with patience, plugging every gap. Isn't that a lesson? Survival sometimes comes not from overpowering the problem, but from outlasting it, resisting its entry one crack at a time. You sit back and close your eyes. The mat blocks the draft well enough that your skin no longer prickles from the cold wind. The lamp warms a small bubble of air, and your linen, though thin, feels heavier when combined with the stillness inside. You hear a child shift beside you, muttering in sleep, and then stillness again. The desert presses outside, relentless. But within these four walls, humans have drawn a line. And so you breathe slower. Your body, still chilled, accepts that this is enough. The palm mat at the door, the straw in the cracks, the narrow alleys outside all are allies. And though the stars shine cold and the dunes sigh with winter's breath, you are reminded that the Egyptians met those same conditions with patience and ingenuity. They did not need modern insulation. They had mats, mud, wood, and above all, persistence. You rest your hand against the doorway, feeling the texture of the woven palm, and marvel at how such small defenses preserved entire generations through nights just like this one. And perhaps, as your eyes close again, you sense the truth. Warmth is not always about fire. Sometimes it is about the quiet triumph of blocking out the wind. The lamp sputters faintly, and shadows dance across the mud-brick walls. The smell of oil lingers in the air, sharp and slightly smoky, mixing with the earthy scent of dust. You shift your gaze toward that flickering glow and realize how much comfort such a small flame once gave. Not only did it cast light to pierce the black void of desert night, but it offered just enough heat to soothe the edge of the cold. Imagine, for a moment, lying in darkness without even this little ember. The silence would be deeper, the fear greater, the cold more merciless. We know from surviving evidence that oil lamps were among the most common household objects in ancient Egypt. Shallow bowls of clay or stone held oil pressed from castor beans or flaxseed, with wicks made of twisted fibers. Their flames were never roaring, never large enough to fill a room with heat, but their steady presence transformed the atmosphere. A single lamp could make a space feel inhabited, warm in spirit if not entirely in temperature. A rather odd practice included using lamps not just for light, but as a kind of psychological shield. The glow comforted children, kept adults alert against prowling animals, and perhaps even convinced people that warmth was greater than it really was. You can sense it now, the flame licking upward, the faint warmth brushing your cheek if you lean close. In a room otherwise chilled, the lamp creates a pocket of security. Some experts are convinced, while others doubt, that lamps were deliberately placed to maximize heat distribution. Archaeological finds show soot stains on walls, suggesting lamps were set on ledges or niches. Yet whether this was for lighting efficiency or warmth remains uncertain. The truth lingers somewhere between functionality and ritual. After all, lamps were also offerings in temples, symbols of life itself. Couldn't it be both a tool of survival and a gesture to the divine? Close your eyes and listen. The lamp's flame makes a faint crackling, like whispers hidden in the dark. The smell of burning oil is pungent but comforting, a reminder that life still flickers against the vast emptiness outside. Shadows ripple across the room, softening sharp corners, making the mud-brick walls feel less like prison and more like protection. You feel your breath sync with the rhythm of the flame, in out, as though your body too is burning oil to keep alive. Step outside with me again. Across the village, small golden dots flicker in the dark, each one a family's defense against the desert night. The alleys glow faintly with their collective presence, giving the impression of stars brought down to earth. From a distance, it looks almost festive, but when you approach, you see the seriousness in each home. Children curled close to flames, parents shielding them, oil rationed carefully so that the lamp will last until dawn. The oil itself carried weight. It was costly to produce and precious in daily life. Using it at night was a choice, a balance between necessity and scarcity. Perhaps families argued over whether to let the lamp burn longer or to extinguish it early to save resources. Imagine the frustration of being cold and wanting light, yet knowing that too much indulgence today meant hunger or darkness tomorrow. And still the lamp burned. Its flame was modest, but in its glow people told stories, shared food, and prepared for sleep. Think of the intimacy of it. A mother adjusting her child's linen cloak under golden light, a father repairing a mat, siblings whispering dreams while shadows danced overhead. The flame wasn't only survival, it was the stage light for human connection. Your senses fill with the details. The air feels warmer near the lamp, though you know it is mostly illusion. The smoke trails upward, staining the ceiling, and the bitter smell clings to your throat. The sight of the flame draws your gaze again and again, hypnotic, as though it holds secrets of both comfort and eternity. And when your eyes droop, the light softens the transition into dreams, making sleep less frightening. Archaeology has yet to settle the matter of whether lamps were placed near sleeping areas deliberately or only used in communal spaces before being extinguished. Some scholars imagine families letting them burn low through the night for reassurance, while others argue they were put out early to conserve oil. Perhaps it varied. Wealthier households could afford long-burning light, while poorer ones surrendered to darkness once the wick reached its end. Either way, the lamp's presence shaped the rhythm of night. Even the faintest glow gave courage to lie down and surrender to sleep. Without it, the desert would feel like a monster pressing in black, cold, endless. With it, the room became a sanctuary, fragile but human. So you lie back, watching the lamp's last inch of wick disappear into the pool of oil. The flame shrinks, sputters, then steadies once more. It will last a little longer, enough for you to slip into sleep. And as you close your eyes, you realize that sometimes survival is not only about warmth for the body, but warmth for the mind. The Egyptians understood that, and so their tiny lamps burned faithfully against the desert's vast and merciless night. The flame dwindles lower, but another kind of warmth lingers in the room, the warmth of living bodies. You shift beneath your linen cover and notice how the family huddled nearby presses close together, children sprawled against their parents, and even the household animals tethered in the corner. The desert outside is merciless, but within these walls, people and creatures alike become part of the defense against the cold. Archaeological records confirm that animals often shared close quarters with humans in Egyptian households. Goats, sheep, dogs, and even cats were not just companions or livestock, they were radiators of body heat. In poorer homes, animals might be tied inside at night for safety, their presence doubling as warmth. A bleating goat or purring cat was not simply a noise in the dark, but proof that another living body was adding heat to the room. In a twist you might not expect, cats held a particularly important place in this arrangement. Beyond their sacred role in religion, cats were also practical pest control. Keeping them close meant fewer rodents stealing grain stores, but also an extra layer of warmth at night when the cold crept in. Imagine a small tabby curling against your chest, its body vibrating with a purr, its heat seeping through your thin cloak. The animal rests, you rest, and the night feels less punishing. The truth remains unsettled regarding whether livestock were commonly brought indoors every night or only during harsher seasons. Some scholars argue that animals were too valuable to risk exposure in winter, while others suggest that keeping goats and sheep inside caused sanitation issues, making it more likely that they were sheltered separately. Still, evidence of tethering posts within houses hints that animals and humans sometimes shared more than just courtyards. They shared air, heat, and even fleas. The sensory landscape sharpens in your imagination. The smell of the room thickens lanolin from wool, the sharp ammonia tang of animal waste, the faint musk of dogs. It is not pleasant, but it is alive. The bleat of a goat echoes softly, muffled by the thick walls, while the rustle of straw under hooves becomes a lullaby of sorts. Against the cold silence of the desert, these sounds mean company, safety, and warmth. Step outside into the village again. Through narrow alleys you see families leading their animals indoors at twilight. Dust rises from hooves, carrying the smell of earth and dung. Children tug stubborn goats by their ropes, laughing despite the chill, while mothers scold them gently to hurry before the sun dips completely. The sense is communal, every house, a capsule of warmth, each one built not just for humans but for the living network that sustained them. Your thoughts drift to dogs, ever faithful companions. In Egyptian art, they appear beside hunters, guarding households, even playing with children. At night, a dog curled by the doorway offered more than protection. Its body blocked drafts, its heat pooled near sleepers, and its ears caught every rustle outside. To stroke such an animal in the cold dark was to remind yourself that you were not alone in the world. The contrast is striking, the desert sky glittering with stars, vast and cold, versus the cramped, smelly warmth of a mudbrick home filled with humans and beasts. Yet which would you choose? The cold majesty outside or the noisy, fragrant comfort within? The answer seems obvious as you pull your cover tighter and lean toward the sound of breathing bodies around you. Some experts are convinced, while others doubt, that even cattle were sometimes sheltered within larger households. The debate continues because archaeological remains show mixed patterns, some homes with evidence of animal pens, others without. Perhaps it varied by wealth, region, or season. What remains clear is that the Egyptians blurred the boundary between human and animal space in ways that maximized survival. Your senses revel in the details. You feel the warmth of another person's shoulder pressed against yours, the scratch of woolen hair against your cheek. A cat's fur tickles your chin as it climbs across your chest, kneading before settling into a tight ball. The air feels warmer here, not because the flame has grown, but because bodies together trap heat. The rhythm of breathing, human and animal, creates a chorus of life, drowning out the desert's silence. Reflect for a moment. Isn't this a reminder of humanity's oldest alliance? We survived the ice ages, not alone, but side by side with creatures who lent us fur, warmth, and companionship. In Egypt, where gods themselves were depicted with animal heads, the union of human and beast carried spiritual weight as well. Sleeping beside a cat or dog was not just practical, it echoed divine companionship. You exhale and listen as the goat shifts in its tether, straw crunching beneath hooves. A child sighs deeply, rolling closer to a parent. The dog lifts its head for a moment, ears twitching, then lies back down. You feel a pocket of warmth envelop you, fragile but real. The desert outside can howl all it likes. Here inside, survival is stitched together with fur, breath, and closeness. And so, as your eyelids sink once more, you marvel at how warmth was never just about fire or walls. Sometimes it was about trust, about allowing other beings, human or animal, to share their heat, their life, and their comfort. In the end, that was one of the Egyptians' quiet secrets. They didn't endure the night alone. They endured it together. The night deepens, and though the lamp burns low, you sense another kind of comfort woven into the very floor beneath you. Your cheek brushes against a papyrus mat, and you notice its faint perfume, a dry sweetness like sun-baked grass. Egyptians had a gift for turning what the Nile offered into shields against the cold, and nowhere is that clearer than in their bedding. It is well established that reeds and papyrus stalks, once harvested, became more than scrolls and writing surfaces. They were stripped, dried, softened, and transformed into bedding materials. Imagine bundles of papyrus fibers stuffed into sacks, layered into cushions, or plated into mats. Such plant matter, though humble, trapped small pockets of air and created insulation that slowed the loss of body heat. For a people without wool blankets in abundance or modern stuffing, the Nile's vegetation became their nightly ally. An unusual little detail is that bedding often carried a fragrance long after weaving. Freshly cut reeds held a sharp, almost peppery scent. As they dried, that scent mellowed into a sweet, hay-like perfume. Sleepers resting on such material would have breathed in the aroma all night long, a natural air freshener that masked less pleasant odors of shared living spaces. Imagine inhaling the faint sweetness as you curled against the cold comfort. Wasn't only tactile, it was olfactory. Specialists remain divided on how soft this bedding truly was. Some reconstructions suggest reed mats were scratchy and stiff, offering little more than a barrier from dirt. Others argue that when layered or beaten properly, they became surprisingly pliant, even comfortable by ancient standards. Tomb discoveries of mats and cushions hint at variation. Elites may have enjoyed thicker, smoother versions, while farmers endured rougher ones. The truth probably lies in the spectrum of wealth, craft, and care. You run your hand across such a mat now. The surface feels uneven, ribs of the plant pressing into your palm. When you press your ear against it, you hear a faint creak, the whisper of dry fibers shifting. The smell rises again, grassy, faintly dusty, but strangely calming. You realize how sensory survival was. Touch, scent, and sound all became part of resisting the desert night. Step into a wealthier home in your imagination. There, papyrus stuffing might be wrapped in linen, stitched into pillows, or layered atop wooden bed frames. The smoothness of fabric softened the reed's scratch, turning rustic materials into luxuries. Oils perfumed the bedding, perhaps cedar or myrrh, not only masking odors but discouraging pests. You picture a noblewoman reclining against such cushions, her chamber dimly lit, while outside the same desert wind claws at her walls. Her sleep is warmer, softer, but still reliant on the Nile's reeds. Now walk back into a farmer's hut. Here, the mat is laid directly on the floor. Its roughness presses against thin linen, leaving faint impressions on skin. Yet the sleeper sighs in relief because it raises him just enough from the damp soil. A child curls beside him, clutching a bundle of straw like a toy, while the smell of papyrus mixes with the musky odor of livestock. The bedding is crude, but it saves them from the bone-deep cold of earth contact. Researchers continue to puzzle over whether bedding was reused seasonally or maintained year-round. Did families roll up mats and store them away in hotter months? Or did they serve as permanent floor coverings? Some argue for seasonal use, pointing to reed harvest cycles. Others suggest mats were multi-purpose, used for sleeping at night and sitting by day. Archaeological context shows both possibilities, leaving modern scholars without a firm answer. Your senses fill with the texture of survival. You feel the papyrus's rough kiss against your fingertips, hear the squeak of fibers under weight, and breathe the faint sweetness it releases. Against the stark silence of the desert, such sensations anchor you to life. The bedding may not rival modern down feathers, but it represents ingenuity, using what grows abundantly by the Nile to fight what descends mercilessly from the sky each night. And then there's the spiritual layer. Egyptians often linked papyrus with rebirth and creation, for the plant was tied to the Nile's fertility. Sleeping on papyrus, then, might have carried more than comfort, it might have been symbolic, a nightly renewal against death's cold. To lie upon the Nile's gift was to trust that life itself cushioned you from the desert's indifference. You close your eyes and imagine the scene. The mat beneath you releases its fragrance, the cloak above you holds in heat, and the bodies around you radiate warmth. The desert outside is vast, cold, and endless, but here, in this small mud-brick room, reeds, papyrus, and human closeness weave together a fragile sanctuary. As sleep tugs at your eyelids, you marvel at how survival never relied on grandeur. Not pyramids, not temples, but humble reeds and fibers gathered by the riverbank. They held no glory, no permanence, but night after night, they held lives. And that, perhaps, is the truest monument to Egyptian resilience. The room has grown quieter now. The animals have settled, the lamp sputters in its final breaths, and all that remains is the slow, steady rhythm of human breathing. You notice how the family has drawn closer together, bodies pressed side by side, limbs overlapping like interwoven branches. Heat gathers between them, shared and multiplied, forming a living blanket more reliable than cloth or fire. In the desert, where each night claws at warmth with merciless hands, closeness itself became the surest defense. Archaeological records confirm that Egyptian families often slept in shared spaces. Modest homes rarely had separate bedrooms. Instead, mats and bedding were spread in one or two main rooms, everyone lying together. Privacy was a luxury for palaces and wealthier households. For ordinary people, family bonds were both emotional and thermal. By clustering together, they could trap heat in pockets of air, making nights survivable. Curiously enough, evidence from tomb paintings and household models suggests that sleeping arrangements sometimes included extended relatives. Grandparents, cousins, and even visiting kin shared the same floor. Large groups created not only stronger warmth but also greater security. Imagine lying in the middle of such a human knot, children tucked against their parents, siblings whispering until sleep overtakes them, grandparents murmuring prayers under their breath. The combined warmth hums through the air like a quiet fire. No clear consensus exists about whether this was purely practical or also cultural. Some scholars argue that close sleeping was an economic necessity, too few rooms, too few blankets. Others believe it was cultural, tied to Egyptian ideas of unity, kinship, and cosmic order. Did they choose togetherness only because of need, or because it aligned with their worldview? The debate continues, though perhaps both answers are true. You stretch out your hand and feel another body's warmth seeping into yours. A child's small foot presses against your shin, and though it startles you at first, the heat is welcome. Breathing in, you catch the mingled scents of oil, dust, wool, and human skin. It is intimate, unfiltered, and real. In modern life, such closeness may feel invasive, but here, it is survival. Step into your imagination and walk across the rooftops. From above, you see entire families rolled in blankets, sometimes choosing to sleep outdoors when seasons were gentler. The stars blanket them, but so too does their nearness. Brothers and sisters sleep head to toe, fathers curled around mothers, babies tucked into hollows of arms. It is not the solitude of modern beds, it is a hive of warmth. The soundscape shifts accordingly. Soft snores weave into one another, punctuated by the occasional sigh. A baby fusses, quickly hushed with gentle shushing, and soon silence returns. Togetherness itself creates calm. The room feels safer because no one is alone in its darkness. An unusual little detail from burial artifacts reveals dolls, amulets, and figurines found beside children. These weren't merely toys, they were sleep companions, believed to guard against spirits and nightmares. Wrapped in arms, they joined the collective warmth of the family, bridging physical comfort with spiritual security. Even in sleep, Egyptians layered their defenses: body heat, fabric, reeds, and faith. Your senses linger on the details. The heat of another body radiates steadily into your side, making the cold easier to bear. The room smells lived in. Sweat, earth, faint traces of animal dung. It is not fragrant by any means, but it is familiar, grounding. Against the silence of the desert, the chorus of breathing reassures you. The desert may be infinite, but here, you are encircled by life. Researchers continue to puzzle over whether separate sleeping arrangements for genders or ages existed in lower-class homes. Some argue that boys and girls were eventually separated, while others point out the practicality of everyone staying together. The scant evidence leaves only fragments of possibility. What is clear is that in most ordinary houses, togetherness trumped separation when the night turned cold. Reflect for a moment on the symbolism. To survive the desert night required surrendering personal space, choosing warmth over solitude. In a way, it was a physical metaphor for Egyptian society itself, built on unity, communal labor, and shared survival. Just as irrigation required collective effort, so did rest in winter. Sleep was not an individual act, it was a family ritual. You pull the blanket higher, pressing your body into the group. The warmth multiplies instantly, layers of heat bouncing back and forth between skin and fabric. The cold no longer feels like a predator waiting at the door. It feels like a distant nuisance. Within this cocoon, the night can rage outside all it wants. You are defended by the simple, undeniable fact of togetherness. And so, as your eyes drift shut once more, you marvel at the truth. Survival was not always about grand inventions. Sometimes it was about the warmth of a child's foot pressing against your leg, or the steady breath of a parent against your back. In the end, the Egyptians' secret weapon against the coldest nights was not fire, not architecture, not cloth. It was one another. The night wears on, and you find yourself staring up at the ceiling, where heavy blocks of stone form the roof. In daylight, that ceiling seems unremarkable, just another part of the house. But in the fragile balance of desert living, those thick roofs shaped the very rhythm of warmth and cold. You listen to the faint creak as the structure settles, and you realize how much weight presses above you, both literally and symbolically. It is well established through excavation that many Egyptian homes, especially in towns and cities, used flat roofs supported by wooden beams topped with layers of mud and sometimes stone slabs. These roofs were not just protection from rain or sandstorms, they were thermal regulators. By day, the heavy layers absorbed the searing heat of the Sunday. By night, they released that stored warmth downward, creating a buffer against the sharp chill outside. An unusual little detail is that roofs were living spaces as much as protective layers. Families cooked, dried laundry, or even slept on rooftops during warmer months. The same platform that kept out the cold in winter became a terrace under the stars in summer. You imagine standing there now, the desert stretching endlessly, the Milky Way painted across the sky, while below, your family sleeps sheltered from the cold. Experts keep revisiting the uncertainty around just how effective these roofs were in winter. Some argue the thermal mass was enough to keep rooms relatively stable, while others suggest the release of stored heat faded quickly, leaving interiors chilly by midnight. Without modern insulation, how long could a stone or mud roof really hold warmth? The debate continues, though the evidence of soot-stained ceilings implies that fires and lamps supplemented whatever heat the roof released. Your senses drink in the experience. The ceiling above you feels cool to the touch now, but not freezing. Its texture is rough, bits of grit loosening under your fingers. You smell faint traces of smoke clinging to it, as if the stones have absorbed years of cooking fires and oil lamps. When the wind howls outside, you hear only a faint sigh through the roof beams, muted and distant. It feels solid, heavy, protective, like a great hand pressing warmth into the room. Step outside in imagination. In the pale moonlight, rooftops appear as flat squares, forming a second level of the cityscape. Some families lie curled under blankets there, enjoying open air in seasons when the nights are gentler. Others have sealed their rooftop doors, conserving heat below. You hear the rustle of cloth, the faint cry of a baby, the distant bark of a dog. Each roof is both floor and ceiling, surface and shelter, a dual role that ties the living to the architecture. Now step inside a palace. The roofs here are thicker, the beams stronger, the layering more deliberate. Some even feature stone slabs designed to last generations. Within such walls, warmth lingers longer. The difference between elite and commoner is subtle but real. The wealthy still feel the desert's chill, but their walls and roofs soften its bite. You can almost smell the perfumed oils rubbed into palace ceilings to mask smoke stains, hear the shuffle of servants tending lamps through the night. Contrast this with a poor man's hut. The roof there may sag under the weight of mud, patched hastily after floods. Cracks let in drafts, and dust rains down with every gust of wind. Yet even that fragile barrier slows the night's assault. The humble roof becomes a lifeline, imperfect but essential. Reflect for a moment on the metaphor. Roofs were not only physical shields, they were symbols of continuity. They tied one generation to the next, rebuilt after floods, repaired after storms, passed down as protection. Each night beneath them was an act of trust. Trust in mud, trust in stone, trust in the craftsmanship of hands long gone to dust. The sensory immersion grows deeper. You close your eyes and hear the faint patter of sand against the roof, swept by wind. You feel the heaviness above, pressing down but also reassuring. The air inside, though still cool, is warmer than the night outside. The stone has given back some of the day's sun, a quiet, invisible gift. Academic voices differ on whether Egyptians understood this thermal cycle in scientific terms, or whether they simply learned by experience. Perhaps they did not speak of heat retention, but of tradition. This is how we build because it works. And indeed it did. For thousands of years, families endured the harshest nights under these roofs, waking each dawn to rebuild life again. You turn onto your side, pulling the linen tighter around your shoulders. The ceiling looms above, silent and strong, its presence both heavy and comforting. You know that outside, the desert winds rage. But here, under this weight of mud and stone, you are reminded of the Egyptians' quiet wisdom, to make the roof not just a cover, but a partner in survival. And so you drift closer to sleep, cocooned beneath stone that once baked in the sun and now whispers back its heat. In this way, the desert is tamed not with force, but with patience, persistence, and the steady hands of those who built walls and roofs to hold warmth through the longest, coldest hours. The rooster crows again, this time closer to dawn, yet the air still bites with a chill that seeps into your skin. You notice that the family stirs slightly, some shifting under their covers, others curling tighter against the cold. It becomes clear that their survival here was not just about bricks, bedding, or lamps. It was also about rhythm, knowing when to shift where they slept depending on the season. Egyptians had a habit you may not expect, moving their resting places as the year turned. We know from surviving evidence that families often alternated between rooftops and enclosed rooms. In the scorching months, they sought relief in open air, spreading mats on flat roofs to catch breezes. But in the cold season, those same rooftops were abandoned, doors sealed, and sleep moved indoors. This seasonal migration, though simple, reflected an intimate knowledge of climate. They adapted their very patterns of sleep to the natural cycle of their environment. An unusual little detail comes from artistic depictions showing people lying beneath stars in summer months, sometimes even with low fences built on rooftops to prevent falls. By contrast, winter iconography shows families huddled inside with heavier cloaks. It suggests not just adaptation, but ritual sleep was a seasonal act, woven into the yearly calendar as much as farming or religious festivals. There is lively disagreement in the field about how abrupt these transitions were. Some scholars argue that the shift from rooftop to interior happened swiftly at the first chill of autumn. Others suggest a gradual blend, some family members inside, others still braving the roof. Without written accounts, the pattern remains uncertain. What is clear is that Egyptians understood the desert's dual nature and moved with it rather than against it. Your senses trace this rhythm. Imagine lying on a roof in June, warm air still clinging to your skin, the faint breeze a relief after blistering daylight. Stars sparkle above you, jackals call faintly in the distance, and you doze under linen so thin it's almost translucent. Now shift to January. That same roof is deserted, doors shuttered, mats pulled inside. The stars remain, but you no longer dare sleep beneath them. Instead, the cold drives you into mudbrick chambers, into shared warmth, into layers of cloth and reeds. Step outside with me and walk the village at dawn. In summer, the rooftops are dotted with sleeping bundles, families still stirring from outdoor beds. In winter they are empty, their surfaces swept clean, their doors sealed. The change is stark, a visual reminder of human flexibility. The houses seem to breathe differently in each season, open in summer, closed in winter, like lungs adjusting to air. Think of the spiritual implications. Egyptians tied much of life to cycles: the flooding of the Nile, the path of the sun, the turning of seasons. Sleep patterns mirrored these rhythms. To them, shifting from roof to room was not inconvenience, it was harmony. Just as they sowed in one season and harvested in another, so too they rested differently as climate demanded. Your senses fill with the practical details. The mudbrick interior smells of soot and oil, its air heavy but warmer than the outside. The rooftop, by contrast, smells of open night, carrying dust and faint moisture from the river. One place is fragrant with life pressed close together, the other vast and airy but merciless in winter. Your skin tells the truth, indoors in cold months, outdoors when heat smothers. Some experts are convinced, while others doubt, that poorer families sometimes had no choice but to remain on rooftops, even in cold weather. Limited space, overcrowding, or damaged roofs may have forced them to endure exposure longer than ideal. Perhaps some covered themselves in thicker mats, stacking reeds high, while others simply endured sleepless nights. The archaeological silence leaves this possibility open, reminding us that adaptation was not always equal. And yet, despite hardship, the principle remained. Survival meant movement, adjustment, and flexibility. Egyptians did not force the desert to bend, they bent with it. They flowed like the Nile itself, accepting its floods, its droughts, its seasons. Even sleep was part of this grand dance, shifting location, texture, and ritual with the years turning. Reflect for a moment. In modern life, you may think of your bed as fixed, always in the same place, always reliable. But here, the very idea of bedroom was fluid. You might sleep beneath the stars one month and under heavy roofs the next. You might share your space with animals in winter and reclaim solitude in summer. This constant adjustment was not weakness, it was wisdom. You draw your linen tighter around your body, aware that tonight you rest indoors, while above your head the roof waits for its summer roll once again. The house itself is seasonal, like a living organism that breathes with the desert's rhythm. The people who built it understood what you now feel in your bones. To endure here, you must live in sync with the night sky and the shifting winds. And so, as dawn edges closer, you marvel that survival was not only about objects, mats, cloaks, lamps, but about patterns. Egyptians mastered the art of moving with the seasons, letting their homes, their bodies, and their very sleep become part of the eternal cycle of desert life. The rooster's cry fades, replaced by the hush of pre-dawn. You stir again, and this time the air carries the faintest trace of smoke. Outside, in the courtyard, embers still glow where a fire once roared. The Egyptians rarely built flames inside their small mud-brick rooms. The risk of smoke, suffocation, and fire was too great, but they knew how to use the remnants of fire wisely. Even the ashes of last night's blaze had value. Archaeological findings confirm that hearths and fire pits were most often found in courtyards or open spaces attached to houses, not in the main living chambers. By day, these fires cooked bread and stews, boiling water for brewing or washing. By night, the coals remained alive, glowing softly, releasing heat that lingered long after the flames were gone. Families often brought that warmth indoors, indirectly carrying pots filled with embers, or letting the residual heat seep through walls as the night pressed colder. A rather curious practice sometimes involved placing warmed stones or clay vessels into sleeping areas. Heated by embers, these objects retained warmth for hours. Imagine clutching a clay jar, still warm to the touch, cradling it under a blanket as the desert wind howled outside. It may not have been central heating, but it was ingenuity born of necessity. The smell of ash would cling to such vessels, the surface blackened, but in the deep of night, the comfort was worth every mark. Even today, historians debate whether Egyptians used braziers indoors during the coldest nights. Some argue the risk of smoke inhalation would have been too severe, while others point to portable ceramic braziers found at excavation sites as evidence that controlled indoor heating may have existed. The lack of direct records leaves the question unresolved, but the thought lingers perhaps in winter. Some families risked a smouldering fire indoors, balancing survival with danger. You kneel beside the fire pit in your imagination. The ash feels soft, almost silky, leaving grey streaks on your fingertips. A faint warmth still rises from deeper layers, surprising you. The smell is sharp and smoky, carrying a memory of roasted bread. In the stillness, you sense the fire's ghost, its heat long gone but its presence lingering. You realize that for the Egyptians, fire was not constant, it was fleeting. Its role was not to blaze through the night, but to leave behind warmth for bodies to borrow. Step into a noble household. Here, servants tended larger courtyards where fires could be sustained longer, and embers transferred into the chambers of their masters. Perhaps ceramic braziers glowed faintly in corners, their smoke vented through small slits in the walls. Wealth allowed experimentation, and so the cold was softened more deliberately. The scent of cedar or myrrh might have been sprinkled into flames, perfuming the air as well as warming it. Now contrast with the home of a farmer. His courtyard fire is modest, fueled by dried dung and scraps of wood. At night he scrapes the coals into a clay pot, carries it inside, and places it near his family's bedding. The glow barely illuminates the room, but its heat radiates quietly. The air smells of smoke and dung, sharp and earthy, yet in that smell lies reassurance. Warmth has followed them inside. The sensory world fills you. You run your hand across a clay pot still faintly warm, its surface rough with soot. You breathe the acrid smoke and feel it cling to your hair, your cloak, your skin. You hear the faint crackle as embers shift, tiny sparks whispering into darkness. Against the chill, the fire's afterlife feels like a companion, a reminder that the sun will return. Some experts are convinced, while others doubt, that communal fires in villages also served as nightly gathering places. Families may have carried home embers from shared flames, ensuring no household wasted resources starting a fire from scratch. It paints a picture of community, of survival not in isolation but together, each home borrowing from the same flame. Reflect for a moment on the symbolism. Fire in Egypt was both sacred and practical. The sun god Ra lit the world by day, and by night his miniature reflections burned in courtyards. To carry embers indoors was to carry a piece of the sun's promise that even in the coldest hours, warmth could be preserved. You curl closer to your blanket, imagining the faint glow of a clay brazier beside you. Its heat is modest but steady, its light a soft pulse against the mudbrick walls. Outside, the desert wind moans, sand scratching against doors, but inside, a fragile warmth holds fast. The Egyptians did not conquer the cold with firestorms. They borrowed gently from flame, carried embers like treasure, and trusted that the smallest glow was enough to see them through the night. And so, as you drift once more towards sleep, you realize that survival was not about abundance. It was about thrift, patience, and making the most of what little remained. A few glowing embers, a clay pot, a wall of mudbrick that was enough to carry life into another dawn. The faint glow of embers fades completely, and once again the room is ruled by cold and shadow. You tug the fabric tighter, but soon realize that warmth does not always come from extra fuel or elaborate tricks. Sometimes the very clothes you wore through the day became your blanket at night. Egyptians were practical like that. Garments doubled as insulation, cloaks transformed into bedding, and what protected you from sun by day guarded you from frost by night. Archaeological records confirm that Egyptian clothing was rarely wasted. Linen tunics, kilts, and mantles were layered not only for modesty but for survival. At night, those same garments could be repurposed, spread across mats, draped over children, or wrapped tightly around shoulders. Even the poorest villager, owning perhaps only 2 or 3 pieces of clothing, made them serve double duty. Sleep came not in pajamas or quilts but in cloaks and mantles that carried the dust of the day. Curiously enough, depictions in tomb art show figures wrapped tightly in long cloaks, their bodies hunched as though bracing against chill. Some of these images may symbolize protection in the afterlife, but they also reflect a lived truth. Cloaks were more than fashion, they were shields. The fabric's weave was loose enough to breathe in summer, yet dense enough, when folded multiple times, to trap body heat at night. There is ongoing debate about how much layering was typical. Some specialists argue that linen's lightness meant people needed several garments to fight the cold, layering tunics, shawls, and cloaks. Others suggest a single heavy mantle, carefully folded and tucked, might suffice for most nights. Textiles rarely survive intact, leaving archaeologists to piece together the puzzle from fragments. What remains certain is that cloth was the first and last line of defense against the shifting desert air. Your senses immerse you. The linen feels cool against your fingertips at first, smooth like pressed parchment. But fold it 2 or 3 times, press it close, and suddenly the warmth builds. The smell of oil lingers faintly in the fibers, rubbed in to soften and preserve them. Dust clings stubbornly, carrying with it the aroma of fields and animals. Wrapped tight in such cloth, you feel both the memory of the day and the promise of warmth for the night. Step outside with me in your imagination. Across the village, you see silhouettes bundling themselves as the night deepens. Men knotting cloaks across their chests, women drawing shawls over their heads, children tucked beneath mantles too large for their small frames. The streets smell of wool, dust, and smoke. No one carries extra blankets, only the same garments they wore while working in fields or markets. It is a seamless transition, daywear turned into night armor. Now enter a wealthier household. In such rooms, storage chests hold spare cloaks and layered mantles, perfumed with cedar or myrrh. Servants spread these garments across couches or rope beds, layering them like quilts. The linen is finer, smoother, sometimes embroidered with colored borders. In winter, imported wool mantles add extra thickness. The master of the house lies down, wrapped not in a single garment but in abundance, warmth cushioned by wealth. Contrast that with the home of a farmer. He lies with his family on reed mats, using the same cloak he wore to the fields, its hem still stiff with dust. His children share his mantle, their small bodies burrowing into its folds. The fabric may be rough, even frayed, but pressed together, it holds warmth. The difference is stark, but the principle is the same. Survival comes by turning daily clothing into night's bedding. A quirky detail worth imagining is how sandals and headcloths also played their part. Sandals, sometimes stuffed with straw, were kept on or tucked under feet to guard against the chill of the earth. Headcloths, wrapped during the day for shade, were tightened around heads at night to preserve heat. Every piece of apparel served double duty, nothing wasted in the fight against cold. The air inside your chamber thickens with human scent. Linen rubbed with oil carries a faint sweetness, while wool releases its musky lanolin odor. The smell of smoke clings to cloaks worn near fires. These mingling aromas are not unpleasant to those accustomed to them, they are simply the fragrance of life. The reminder that warmth comes not from sterility but from use. Scholarly opinion continues to clash over whether specialized sleeping garments ever existed. Some point to references in texts about night clothes, while others argue these were only ritual shrouds or ceremonial linens. Most evidence suggests that daily garments were indeed the standard for sleep. To undress completely in the cold desert night would have been impractical, even dangerous. Reflect for a moment. In modern life, comfort often means distinction. Clothes for work, clothes for home, clothes for sleep. For Egyptians, comfort meant continuity. The same cloak sheltered you from midday sun and midnight chill. The same tunic bore sweat from the field and soothed you into slumber. Survival was not about categories, it was about adaptability. You shift again, pulling the cloak tighter. Its fibers rasp faintly against your cheek, not soft like modern fabric, but familiar, reliable. You hear a child's muffled cough, then silence again. The family breathes together beneath overlapping layers of cloth, the desert night pressing hard outside, but finding no easy entry here. And so, as your eyelids droop once more, you understand that the Egyptians' defense against the cold was not always grand or elaborate. Sometimes it was simply the art of wrapping oneself tighter, of reimagining garments as blankets, of accepting that survival lies in making the most of what you already have. The night deepens into stillness, and you notice a different kind of fabric draped across a child's shoulders. It is coarser than linen, heavier, and faintly musky in scent. When you reach out to touch it, the fibers feel wiry yet resilient. This is no flax, it is camel hair, a textile less common but uniquely suited to desert extremes. The Egyptians, always resourceful, knew how to harness even the animals of the desert to guard themselves against the coldest hours. We know from excavations and trade records that camel hair and goat hair textiles were used in ancient times, especially in border regions and among nomadic groups. Though linen dominated Egypt proper, imported fibers offered a different kind of insulation. Camel hair in particular, with its hollow fibers, trapped heat efficiently while remaining surprisingly lightweight. In a land of shifting climates, this made it a prized material for those who could acquire it. In a twist you might not expect, camel hair textiles were not always woven into cloaks or blankets. Sometimes they were left as loose fibers, stuffed into sacks or used to line mats for additional padding. Imagine lying down upon a mat filled with wiry camel hair, the surface rough but the warmth undeniable. To modern tastes it might feel itchy, but to an Egyptian in winter, it felt like a shield. Even today, researchers are unsure how widely camel hair was used within Egypt proper. Some argue it was a luxury, arriving through trade caravans, reserved for soldiers, travelers, or the wealthy. Others believe that contact with nomadic groups meant it was more common than we assume. Archaeology has yet to resolve the question, leaving the truth to speculation. What is certain is that camel hair carried with it the very essence of desert survival, a fiber evolved to endure extremes of heat and cold. Your senses take in the moment. The cloak smells faintly of animal musk, a tang of lanolin mixed with dust. When you run your hand along its surface, the hairs prickle against your skin, sharp at first but warming quickly. The weight feels substantial, pressing comfortingly over your shoulders. Beneath it, your body's heat stops fleeing so quickly, trapped by the hollow fibers. Against the howling desert winds outside, this cloak becomes a fortress. Step outside with me and picture a caravan halting at dusk. Traders unload their camels, tether them near fires, and drape themselves in thick cloaks of the animal's own hair. The cold nips, but the cloaks hold heat. Nearby, Egyptian villagers eye these textiles with curiosity, perhaps envy. Some barter food or grain in exchange, bringing a piece of desert nomad wisdom into their homes. Now enter a noble household. A camel hair mantle, darker and heavier than linen, lies folded in a chest. Perfumed oils mask its musk, giving it a sweetness that lingers in the air. Servants spread it across the master's bed on colder nights, layering it atop fine linens. The combination of luxury and practicality speaks volumes. Comfort, after all, was never just about softness. It was about survival, dressed in elegance. Contrast with the poor farmer again. He may never own such a cloak, but perhaps he stuffs scraps of goat hair or camel hair into his bedding, woven crudely into mats or sacks. The fibers scratch, but the warmth they provide makes the discomfort worthwhile. His children might wrinkle their noses at the smell, but they nestle into it all the same, grateful for heat more than fragrance. Academic circles have long contested if Egyptians deliberately wove hair textiles into daily garments, or if they used them primarily for utility objects like mats and tent coverings. The lack of intact fabrics leaves the answer suspended. Yet fragments found in desert burials show that animal hair textiles did indeed circulate. The question is not whether they existed, but how far their use extended into nightly survival. Your imagination paints the sensory scene. A cloak of camel hair crackles faintly as you pull it close, its fibers resisting and then yielding. The air smells strongly at first, but soon you grow accustomed, even comforted by the earthy aroma. You hear the faint whisper of wind against the cloak, muffled now, less threatening. In this cocoon, the night feels less vast, less merciless. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking that the desert itself provided the solution? The same animal that carried loads by day offered its fibers by night. The Egyptians did not invent new materials, they borrowed from their companions, weaving survival from what the desert already shaped. Camel hair cloaks remind you that resilience often lies not in invention, but in recognition of what nature already offers. You exhale, your breath dampening the cloak briefly before it dries in the cool air. Children beside you pull closer, their small hands clutching the edge of the textile. Together, you share the warmth it gives, feeling the night's sharpness dull. Outside, the wind roams endlessly across the dunes. Inside, the hollow fibers of a desert animal defy it quietly. And so, as sleep draws nearer once more, you realize the Egyptians' genius was not only in their monuments of stone, it was in these humble choices: garments, cloaks, mats, fibers that turned unbearable nights into survivable ones. Survival, after all, is built on details as much as pyramids. The cloak of camel hair rests heavily on your shoulders, but another scent soon rises in the air, something softer, sweeter, and strangely soothing. It is the aroma of oil, rubbed into skin before sleep. The Egyptians knew that warmth was not only about what surrounded you, but what clung directly to your body. Oils and unguents, rich with fragrance, became nightly companions, guarding against dryness, easing the sting of cold winds, and turning the act of sleep into a small ritual. We know from surviving evidence that Egyptians were masters of oil production. They pressed flaxseed, castor, moringa, and even sesame, creating oils that served as food, medicine, and cosmetics. At night, those same oils softened skin cracked by desert air and helped preserve body heat by forming a thin, protective layer. Rubbing oil into the skin was more than vanity. It was practical. Against the sharp dryness of the desert night, it became a shield. Curiously enough, many of these oils were perfumed with herbs and resins. Frankincense, myrrh, and cinnamon were mixed with base oils, turning simple protection into luxury. Imagine lying down on a reed mat, the smell of cedar oil rising from your skin, its warmth clinging as you wrap yourself in linen. The fragrance lulls you into a calmer state, making even the cold air feel less invasive. For the wealthy, sleep became scented comfort. The question remains unsettled among historians whether ordinary farmers had regular access to these perfumed oils, or whether they were largely confined to temples and elite households. Some argue that modest families used plain castor or sesame oil without fragrance, while others believe small quantities of scented blends filtered down through trade and festivals. Either way, oil touched nearly every level of society. It was too useful to be ignored. Your senses dive into the ritual. You imagine dipping your fingers into a small clay jar, its rim sticky with residue. The oil feels thick and slightly sticky at first, then smooth as you rub it into your skin. A faint warmth blooms, both from the friction and from the barrier the oil creates. The smell clings to your hands, earthy castor perhaps, or sharp cinnamon if you were lucky. Against the backdrop of smoke, animal musk and dust, this fragrance feels like a miracle. Step into a noble home. Here, jars of perfumed oil line shelves, their alabaster containers carved with care. Servants massage warm oil into their mistress's skin before she reclines. The air grows heavy with myrrh, rich and resinous, turning the bedchamber into a sanctuary of scent. Sleep in such a place is not only warmer, it is ceremonial, wrapped in luxury and ritual. Now shift to a farmer's hut. He has one jar of plain oil, pressed from castor beans. Its taste bitter, but its use essential. He rubs it into cracked hands, then onto his children's skin, smoothing roughness caused by wind and work. The smell is strong, almost medicinal, yet it reassures him. Tomorrow he will rise to labor again, but tonight his skin is softened, his warmth preserved. The contrast between classes is clear, yet both share the same wisdom. Oil makes sleep kinder. A rather odd detail emerges from medical papyri. Some oils were believed to protect against spirits or illness during sleep. Recipes mix oils with herbs and incantations, applied to the body or to amulets hung nearby. In these cases, oil was more than physical protection. It was spiritual insulation. To sleep, oiled and perfumed, was to rest under the guardianship of both nature and the gods. The sensory atmosphere becomes vivid. The smell of oil fills the small room, mingling with smoke and sweat, creating a layered fragrance unique to Egyptian nights. Your skin feels slick but warmer, your muscles relaxed from the massage. The flicker of a lamp catches the sheen on your arm, turning it golden for a moment before shadows reclaim it. You hear the faint squeak of a child adjusting on a mat, their skin also shining faintly with oil. The night feels less harsh when your body carries its own shield. Some experts are convinced, while others doubt, that oils also served as insect repellents during sleep. Certain blends of cedar, juniper, or frankincense may have discouraged pests, though evidence is mixed. If true, the practice solved two problems at once: warmth against dryness and defense against bites. Whether intentional or not, the effect must have been welcomed. Reflect for a moment on what this reveals. In modern life, oils are indulgences, cosmetic luxuries, but in Egypt, they were survival tools, woven into daily and nightly life. The same jar that anointed kings in temples also soothed a farmer's cracked skin at dusk. Survival and ritual blurred together until warmth, fragrance, and faith became inseparable. You lie back now, your skin slick with oil, the fragrance wrapping you like an invisible blanket. The cold still lingers, but it no longer stings. Your body feels sealed, guarded, soothed. Outside, the desert wind prowls, but inside, you carry your own warmth. You drift into slumber, reminded that sometimes survival lies not only in walls and cloaks, but in the smallest rituals, fingers dipping into a jar, rubbing oil across weary skin, turning night into comfort. The fragrance of oil still lingers faintly on your skin, but as dawn creeps closer, you imagine the darker nights when families had no home to return to, or when disaster forced them to seek refuge elsewhere. For many Egyptians, sacred spaces, temples, chapels, even granaries became emergency shelters against the cold. In those vast stone halls, warmth was scarce, but the walls offered safety, and sometimes that alone was enough to make sleep possible. Archaeological records confirm that temples were not only religious centers but also hubs of community life. People gathered there during festivals, sought healing in their courtyards, and occasionally took shelter within their walls. Granaries and storehouses, too, doubled as communal refuges in times of hardship. Their thick stone construction made them cooler during the day, but at night, those same walls kept out biting winds. To sleep inside a granary was to lie in darkness beside the kingdom's lifeblood-stored grain that represented both survival and stability. An unusual little detail can be found in graffiti, etched on temple walls, where travelers and villagers scratch their names or prayers. Some may have been carved by people who passed the night there, waiting for dawn within sacred protection. Imagine lying on a temple floor, your body curled against stone, colder than any bed, yet comforted by carvings of gods watching overhead. Even today, historians debate whether temples formally allowed villagers to shelter within, or whether people slipped in quietly when guards and priests turned their backs. Some scholars believe the cold season festivals were times when doors remained open, the community gathering in warmth together. Others argue that access was restricted, and only special circumstances led to temporary refuge. The lack of direct records leaves the matter unresolved. But the human need for shelter makes it easy to imagine desperate families finding a corner among the columns. Your senses step into such a space. The temple's vastness echoes with every movement. The sound of a reed mat unrolling, bouncing off stone like thunder. The air smells of incense long since burned, mixed with dust and pigeon droppings. The chill here is sharp, radiating from the ground itself, but it is steady, no wind, no sudden drafts. You run your hand over a column, its surface smooth yet cold, carved with hieroglyphs of gods promising eternity. Somehow, that divine presence makes the night less lonely. Now picture the granary. Its thick mudbrick walls loom high, pierced by narrow windows designed for ventilation. The smell of stored grain fills the air, earthy and sweet, with faint traces of chaff drifting across the floor. Farmers may have curled in corners here, wrapping themselves in cloaks, children tucked between sacks of wheat. The grain itself, radiating the day's stored warmth, offered comfort, like sleeping beside the very body of the Nile's abundance. Step into a noble household storeroom. Even elites sometimes used granary chambers to rest during the coldest nights. Servants unrolling mats among jars of barley and emmer. The symbolism is powerful. Surrounded by food, you lie in security, safe from hunger, sheltered from cold. Each breath tastes faintly of grain dust, each inhale reminding you that life is stored within these walls. Academic voices differ on whether Egyptians saw this as practical or spiritual. Some believe that resting near grain was considered sacred, tied to Osiris and the cycles of rebirth. Others argue it was simply pragmatic. Thick walls and warm stores made better shelter than thin air. Both may be true practicality and symbolism blending as often happened in Egyptian life. The sensory atmosphere is vivid. You feel the grain sacks beneath your hands, their rough woven surfaces scratchy but solid. The air tastes dry, filled with fine dust that tickles your throat. Yet the room feels alive, humming with the stored heat of the harvest. Your body relaxes as you nestle into this cocoon of abundance. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking how survival and spirituality converged here? To sleep in a temple was to rest beneath the gaze of gods, while to sleep in a granary was to rest beside the kingdom's lifeblood. Both offered more than warmth. They offered reassurance. The Egyptians endured not just by blocking cold, but by surrounding themselves with symbols of permanence and hope. You close your eyes now, imagining yourself curled between jars of grain, the faint smell of incense wafting from a nearby shrine. Outside, the desert wind howls across dunes, but here inside, the walls stand silent and firm. The gods watch, the grain breathes faint warmth, and the night's menace fades. And so you drift into slumber, reminded that survival was not always found in the home alone. Sometimes it was found in sacred halls, or among the stored bounty of the Nile, places where stone and spirit joined to shelter the living through the coldest of nights. The sacred halls fade from your imagination, and once more you return to a modest village house. Here, sleep is made not only on reed mats, but on something more refined, wooden frames strung with rope or woven cord. Though wood was rare and precious in Egypt, some families, and especially the wealthy, found ways to elevate themselves from the cold earth. To sleep above the ground was not luxury alone, it was survival. Archaeological discoveries confirm that Egyptians crafted beds from imported timbers like cedar or native acacia, their frames lashed with woven cord. These cords, crisscrossed tightly, created a springy surface onto which mats, linens, or stuffed cushions were laid. By lifting the body from the floor, such beds reduced heat loss into the cold-packed soil. Even a small gap of air beneath the sleeper meant a noticeable difference in warmth. In a rather curious twist, some of these beds had legs carved to resemble animal paws or bull hooves, as though the sleeper rested on the strength of sacred creatures. Imagine lying on such a frame, the cords creaking faintly beneath you, the wooden legs standing proud, and your body spared from the damp bite of earth. Even in sleep, symbolism merged with practicality. The matter of how common beds truly were remains contested. Some experts argue that rope beds were rare, reserved for elites, since timber was scarce and costly. Others suggest that simpler wooden frames may have been more widespread than we assume, their remains lost to decay. Fragments of humble wooden legs found in workmen's villages at Deir el-Medina hint that beds were not the sole privilege of nobility. Perhaps poorer households had cruder versions, low frames built from scrap wood, supporting nothing more than woven reeds. Your senses step into the experience. You press your hand against the rope strung across the frame. It feels rough, leaving faint imprints on your skin, yet springy, unlike the hard ground. The faint creak of fiber echoes in the silence, a gentle reminder of the structure holding you. Above you, the roof traps warmth. Beneath you, air circulates instead of leaching your heat into soil. You shift your weight, and the cords adjust, creating a rhythm of small sounds that lull you into calm. Step into a noble's chamber. The bed here is not only practical but ornate. Legs gilded, headrests carved from ivory, linens embroidered with colored thread. Servants smooth the bedding with perfumed oils, ensuring both warmth and softness. The master reclines not just above the ground, but in a space of prestige. Yet beneath all the ornament, the principle is the same. The cords lift the body, the frame holds heat in, and survival is made easier. Now step into a craftsman's hut. His bed is modest, perhaps little more than wooden poles lashed together, but it keeps his family from sleeping on bare earth. His children climb into it, clambering over each other, their laughter breaking briefly through the night's hush before sleep claims them. The cords creak loudly, dust falls from the ceiling, but none of that matters. They are warmer, and that warmth is everything. An unusual detail. Some beds were designed with sloping frames, higher at the head, requiring wooden or stone headrests instead of pillows. To you, it may seem uncomfortable, but for Egyptians it was normal, even beneficial. They believed it aided breathing, preserved hairstyles, and aligned the body properly for rest. Imagine laying your head on a curved headrest, its surface cool and hard, while your cloak shields your shoulders. Unfamiliar, yes, but effective in their eyes. The sensory world builds. You feel the rope sag slightly beneath your weight, the wood cool but solid under your hand. The smell of timber rare, precious fills your nose, carrying hints of resin. The faint squeak of cord becomes a lullaby, weaving into the background of breathing bodies and the rustle of cloth. For a moment, the night no longer feels harsh. Elevated above the earth, you float between cold air and warmth, shielded by ingenuity. Researchers continue to puzzle over whether such beds were used daily by all members of a household or reserved for heads of families. Tomb models sometimes show multiple beds, suggesting broader access, while other evidence implies hierarchy. Parents on frames, children on mats. The lack of certainty leaves the image open-ended, but in every case, the logic remains elevation was protection. Reflect on this for a moment. Isn't it remarkable that even something as simple as lifting oneself a hand's breadth off the ground changed survival? Egyptians understood this intuitively. They built frames not only for status but for comfort. And in their designs, you glimpse a principle that has carried into your own life. Your modern mattress, your raised bed frame, your pillow all owe something to these early solutions. You roll onto your side, the cords groaning softly beneath you. The air beneath your body moves faintly, cool but separate. Your cloak holds heat, your mat cushions your side, and for the first time tonight, the cold no longer feels victorious. Outside, the desert is endless, merciless. Inside, you rest above it, supported by wood, rope, and the ingenuity of hands long gone. And so, as your eyes close once more, you understand that survival was never just about walls or fires. It was about finding clever ways to use materials at hand, stone, wood, fiber, to change the relationship between body and earth. In that elevation, Egyptians found warmth, comfort, and a small victory over the coldest of desert nights. The bed frame creaks as you shift, but above it hangs something that changes the atmosphere entirely. A canopy of fabric draped from simple poles, falling like a tent within the room. At first, you think it is only for insects, a net against buzzing mosquitoes or biting flies. But as you pull the cloth around your shoulders, you realize that it also serves another purpose. It holds in warmth, creating a pocket of air just for you. Egyptians understood the art of layering not only on their bodies, but also around their sleeping spaces. Archaeological finds and tomb paintings confirm that nets and canopies were common in many households. Made from linen or woven fibers, they were suspended over beds or mats and could be pulled closed like curtains. In summer, they protected against pests that thrive near the river. In winter, those same cloths thickened the air, slowing drafts and trapping body heat inside. What looks like a simple curtain becomes, in practice, a miniature climate control system. Curiously enough, some nets were treated with oils or herbs to repel insects and add fragrance. Imagine lying beneath a canopy that smells faintly of cedar or frankincense, the cloth brushing your face, the air within warmer and calmer than the harsh currents outside. The canopy muffles sound too, softening the cries of animals in the distance, creating an intimate cocoon. For children, it must have felt like magic, a world of their own, sheltered and safe. There is lively disagreement in the scholarly community about whether these canopies were used widely by commoners or mostly by elites. Some argue that nets were expensive, woven with fine linen, and thus more accessible to wealthier families. Others point out that simple reed or fiber versions could have been made cheaply, suggesting that even poorer households may have enjoyed their protection. Without definitive evidence, the truth remains elusive. Your senses wrap themselves in the experience. The canopy sways slightly in the draft, the linen cool and soft as it brushes against your cheek. You smell faint traces of oil rubbed into the fibers, giving them both strength and fragrance. The air inside feels warmer already, your breath creating a microclimate that lingers, while the cloth muffles the sharp hiss of wind outside. It is not silence, but it is gentleness. You hear only the faint shuffle of bodies beside you, their breathing steady, cocooned within their own spaces of fabric. Step into a noble's chamber. The canopy here is elaborate, dyed faintly with colors, embroidered along the edges. Servants tuck it carefully around the bed frame, sealing in warmth, perfuming the air with scented oils. The master lies within, guarded not only by fabric, but by the sense of luxury that transforms necessity into ritual. The canopy becomes more than protection, it becomes a symbol of refinement. Now step into a villager's hut. The canopy is simpler, perhaps nothing more than a reed mat hung from cords, but it performs the same miracle. A child pulls it closed, giggling as the world outside disappears. The family breathes easier beneath its cover, less exposed to cold drafts and biting pests. The smell is raw, reeds and dust, perhaps faint traces of smoke, but still the space feels safer, warmer. An unusual little detail. In some tomb scenes, canopies are depicted not as nets but as fully draped tents erected inside chambers. These portable shelters may have been used during travel or by soldiers, creating warmth in unfamiliar environments. Imagine a soldier unrolling a linen canopy after a long march, setting it up beside a fire, then curling beneath it as the desert frost crept in. Even far from home, the canopy created continuity, a sense of place and safety. The sensory landscape expands. The cloth above you ripples softly in the draught, catching the faint golden glow of a lamp. Your fingers trace the weave, each thread rougher than you expected, yet together they create strength. The air inside smells of oil and faint smoke, warmer than outside, less biting. Your body exhales, and warmth gathers slowly, creating a fragile balance that feels like survival. Experts continue to wrestle with the question of whether these canopies were valued more for pest control or for warmth. Perhaps both roles mattered equally, shifting with the seasons. In summer, they shielded against buzzing tormentors. In winter, they created a private climate. That flexibility is itself the genius. One object solving multiple problems, adapted to whatever the desert demanded. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it remarkable how the Egyptians approached survival? They did not think in single solutions, but in layered strategies. A cloak alone was never enough. A mat alone was never enough. A canopy alone was never enough. But when combined mats beneath, cloaks over, canopies around, they created a whole system of defense. Sleep was not chance. It was architecture, ritual, and ingenuity woven together. You settle back beneath the canopy, listening to the softened soundscape it creates. The desert outside still howls, but its sharpness is dulled. Inside, warmth builds in the still air, your breath and body heat no longer fleeing into the night. You close your eyes, comforted by the thought that Egyptians thousands of years ago did the same, pulling fabric around themselves, creating little sanctuaries of warmth and silence in a world that was anything but gentle. And so, as you drift once more towards sleep, you understand that survival here was about more than endurance. It was about creativity, about making every reed, every fiber, every scrap of cloth serve multiple roles. The canopy sways lightly overhead, and you sink into dreams, held in its shelter, proof that even the simplest fabric can transform the harshest desert night into a space of rest. The canopy sways faintly above you, but the real warmth pressing in comes from the smallest figures in the room, children. Their bodies curl instinctively toward parents, their breaths rise and fall in quick rhythm, and their little limbs sprawl without care for space. To the Egyptians, children were not just the promise of the future, but also vital companions in the present night, their presence adding warmth and meaning to sleep itself. Archaeological records and household models confirm that Egyptian families slept in close groups, and children often nestled beside parents long past infancy. Their smaller frames meant they lost heat quickly, but that vulnerability also made them perfect heat sharers, curling against adults like fledglings under wings. For a mother and father, the sensation of a child pressed into their side was both a reassurance and a survival strategy. In a rather unusual detail, children's sleep was accompanied by protective rituals. Amulets shaped like the eye of Horus, tiny figurines of Bez, the household god, and even scarabs were placed near or on children's beds to guard them during the vulnerable hours of night. Imagine a child clutching a small wooden figurine of Bez, its wide face grinning fiercely, as if daring evil spirits or perhaps the cold itself to come closer. Such charms soothed fear and lent psychological warmth alongside the physical. Some experts are convinced, while others doubt, that lullabies carried hidden magical formulas. Songs hummed softly by mothers may have contained phrases invoking divine guardianship. Whether magical or simply melodic, the effect was the same. The child relaxed, heart rate slowed, and sleep arrived more easily. Even today, fragments of ancient Egyptian lullabies survive, inscribed in texts, proof that music was part of bedtime survival. Your senses immerse in the moment. You hear the faint murmur of a mother's voice, rhythmic and low, a melody carried more by tone than words. The child wriggles, then stills, sighing into sleep. You smell the faint sweetness of oil rubbed onto the child's skin, mixed with the dusty fragrance of reeds beneath. You feel the small warmth radiating from their body, pressing into yours like a living ember. The cold fades, not entirely, but enough to relax. Step into the imagination of a noble household. In such rooms, children might sleep on smaller rope beds, but even then, they were often tucked near parents for warmth. Nurses and attendants hovered close, rocking infants, whispering prayers, and ensuring the master's children were kept safe through the night. Amulets of gold or faience glimmered faintly in lamplight, guarding the little ones. Their dreams, parents believed, needed divine protection as much as their waking hours. Now step into a farmer's hut. Here, children sleep scattered across mats beside their parents. A baby lies swaddled tightly, bound in strips of linen that keep limbs warm and secure. An older child clings to a mother's mantle, sucking a thumb in half-dream. A sibling shifts restlessly, muttering nonsense words into the dark. The parents sigh, weary but reassured the closeness of children is not burden but comfort. In their heat and in their future, the family finds reason to endure. One odd tidbit from excavated amulets. Some were shaped like animals, such as hedgehogs, which Egyptians associated with protection and resilience. Imagine a child tucking such a figurine under a mat, believing it kept nightmares away. The act itself was a ritual of care, a nightly reminder that survival was not just physical but spiritual. The sensory scene grows richer. You hear the rustle of tiny limbs shifting in linen, the quiet hum of breath close to your ear. You see the gleam of a protective amulet in faint firelight. You feel the warmth of multiple small bodies pressing against your side, their heat pooling into a collective shield. Even the air seems softer, filled with the scent of skin, oil, and faint smoke. Researchers continue to puzzle over how much attention Egyptians gave to children's specific sleeping needs. Some argue that swaddling, amulets, and lullabies show deliberate concern. Others suggest these were simple cultural habits, not calculated survival strategies. Either way, the result was the same. Children slept, families warmed, and the cold desert night was endured. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking that survival was always collective, never solitary? Adults, children, animals, even gods all played roles in the nightly ritual. A child's laughter earlier in the evening, a charm carved in the shape of a grinning dwarf god, a lullaby drifting softly, all these became invisible blankets layered over the visible ones. Sleep was not just about heat, it was about reassurance. You pull a child closer, feeling their head press against your shoulder. Their warmth seeps into your chest, their breath tickles your skin, and you close your eyes. The cold outside seems distant, muted. Here, in this knot of family, you find the truest insulation: love, ritual, and the simple weight of another body curled against yours. And so, as your breath slows again, you understand that the Egyptians' wisdom lay not only in bricks, mats, or cloaks. It lay in people the choice to gather, to protect, to reassure, to sleep side by side through the longest nights. In the desert, warmth was not only physical, it was emotional, spiritual, and deeply human. The children's breathing steadies, and you lie still, listening. Outside, the wind sharpens into a thin whistle, slipping across rooftops and whirling dust through narrow streets. For a moment you imagine another way of life entirely, not in mudbrick villages, but in the wide-open desert. Beyond the settled Nile Valley, nomads and traveling merchants pitch tents against the dunes, creating warmth from nothing but fabric, hair, and fire. Their nights were harsher still, yet their survival offered lessons the Egyptians absorbed and adapted. Archaeological records and depictions confirm that goat hair and camel hair tents were the hallmark of desert wanderers. The fibers swelled slightly with moisture, tightening the weave and offering surprising insulation against both heat and cold. By day, the black cloth cast shade. By night, it trapped warmth from fires and bodies within. Imagine a trader rolling into his tent, shaking sand from his cloak, and wrapping himself in a hair blanket while the desert howled outside. An unusual little detail is that these tents were portable homes, dismantled and rebuilt as caravans moved. Wooden poles, ropes, and woven mats came together in an hour, then vanished by sunrise. Such impermanence was survival mobility itself, protected against the extremes of desert life. To lie beneath such a roof was to sleep in something both fragile and enduring, a shelter made to move with the rhythm of trade and seasons. Experts keep revisiting the uncertainty around how much contact existed between Egyptians and nomadic tent dwellers. Some argue Egyptians looked down on them as outsiders, while others suggest trade and intermarriage blurred those boundaries. What is clear is that through exchange of goods, resins, fibers, livestock, the wisdom of the desert crossed cultural lines. Perhaps an Egyptian farmer, sleeping beneath a goat hair mat, never realized the nomadic origin of the technique. Yet the influence was there. Your senses plunge into the image. Inside a tent, the air smells of animal hair and smoke. The fibers prickle faintly against your fingertips as you brush the hanging walls. A fire pit glows at the center, its smoke seeping through gaps, staining the fabric above. Heat radiates outward, absorbed by the black cloth, then pressed back onto the sleepers gathered in a circle. You hear low murmurs of conversation, the jangle of a camel's harness outside, the rhythmic sigh of sand moving under wind. Within that space, the desert is held at bay by cloth and community. Step into a caravan on the move. At nightfall, traders tether camels, unload sacks of incense, copper, or grain, then stretch their tents against poles. Children chase each other barefoot through cooling sand before being gathered inside. Women prepare food over embers, the smell of lentils and bread mixing with smoke. When the night deepens, the family draws close, cloaks pulled tight, fire dimmed to coals. The desert is endless, but inside the tent there is laughter, warmth, and the hum of stories told until sleep claims them. Now, compare it to a settled Egyptian home. Mudbrick walls replace fabric, courtyards replace central fires, yet the principles remain the same. Enclose the space, gather bodies close, slow the wind. Whether by hair tents or clay bricks, survival is the art of turning barriers into pockets of warmth. The details differ, but the wisdom is shared. A quirky observation from early Greek travelers notes that desert wanderers often smeared their tents with animal fat, increasing water resistance and perhaps insulation. Whether Egyptians borrowed this practice is uncertain, but the idea lingers. The desert demanded experiments, and those experiments often left faint echoes in Nile society. The sensory contrast deepens. Imagine lying inside a goat hair tent, the air heavy with musk, your body pressed against woven mats. The sound of the wind outside becomes muted, a low hum rather than a shriek. The fire's glow flickers through gaps, stars still visible between threads of fabric. You exhale, and the warmth of breath lingers within, trapped by fibers evolved for survival. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking that across cultures, across lifestyles, the solutions converge? Whether in a mudbrick home or a black cloth tent, people found ways to weave warmth from their environment. Egyptians may have seen themselves as different from desert nomads, but the night leveled all distinctions. When the cold came, every human searched for the same thing: a shield, a cover, a place to curl and wait for dawn. You pull your own cover tighter, imagining for a moment that you are not in a mudbrick village but in a tent pitched against a dune. The sound of the Nile is gone. Instead, sand shifts endlessly beyond the canvas walls. Yet inside, the principle is the same: community, fabric, and fire. And so, whether in a settled home or wandering tent, the Egyptians and their neighbors endured, proving that survival in the desert was never about conquest, it was about adaptation, patience, and shared warmth. The imagined tent fades, and you return once more to the Nile Valley, where the river dictates not only farming but also sleeping habits. For all their ingenuity, the Egyptians could never escape the rhythm of the Nile. Each year, floods transformed the land, reshaping houses, storing moisture in the soil, and influencing how and where people sought rest. Even their strategies for surviving cold nights had to bend to this watery heartbeat. We know from written records and flood marks etched on stone that the inundation of the Nile was both blessing and threat. The water deposited fertile silt, yet it also weakened mudbrick foundations, forcing constant repair and rebuilding. When walls cracked or floors dampened, sleep was affected. People shifted sleeping spots, sometimes moving to higher stories or rooftops to escape moisture seeping up from the ground. In flood seasons, the cold carried a dampness that clung to the skin, different from the dry chill of open desert nights. In a twist you might not expect, some families built temporary sleeping structures on higher ground during flood months. Wooden platforms or makeshift lofts kept them above water and damp earth, adding not only safety but insulation. Archaeologists have found remnants of raised floors in certain floodplain settlements, suggesting that adaptation to seasonal moisture was an integral part of domestic life. Academic voices differ on how disruptive these floods were for nightly routines. Some argue that well-built homes managed the water efficiently, with drainage channels protecting interiors. Others believe villagers endured significant dampness, forcing them to improvise constantly. Perhaps both were true, depending on wealth and geography. Nobles in larger stone-built houses slept soundly above the waterline, while farmers and labourers shifted mats to the driest corners, battling dampness with extra layers of reeds and cloth. Your senses step into that damp season. The air in the house feels heavy, smelling faintly of river mud. The floor beneath your mat is cool and moist, sending shivers into your bones. You run your hand across the wall and feel tiny droplets of condensation beading on the mudbrick, the night air saturated. Linen, usually crisp, clings slightly to your skin with clammy dampness. The cold here is not sharp and dry, but sticky, creeping into lungs with each breath. Step outside into a flooded village. Courtyards hold puddles, reflecting the moon in rippling fragments. Children wade ankle-deep, their laughter mixing with the splash of water. In the distance, farmers tether boats to doorways instead of posts. Roofs, once places of summer leisure, now double as platforms for drying mats or even sleeping, raised above the damp. Fires sputter with wet fuel, their smoke thicker, carrying the scent of charred reeds. Night in flood season was not only cold, it was cumbersome, every act of rest and improvisation. Now picture a granary built on higher ground. Here, guards or workers spread mats along upper platforms, sleeping among sacks of grain. The smell of wheat fills their lungs, the air drier and warmer. Their sleep is less disturbed than those in low huts, proof that hierarchy extended even to rest. Grain not only fed bodies but insulated them against dampness and chill. An unusual little practice mentioned in some texts involves burning aromatic herbs in damp houses, both to mask odours and to dry the air. Imagine families scattering juniper or myrrh into small embers, filling the room with fragrant smoke. The aroma clings to linen and mats, disguising mildew while adding a sense of comfort. The practice blurred practicality with ritual drying the night air and pleasing household gods at once. The sensory contrast sharpens. Damp linen clings to your skin, the smell of river mud fills your nostrils, and your breath fogs faintly in the chill air. A child coughs in the corner, the wetness aggravating their lungs. Yet above, on a raised platform, air feels clearer, reed mats smell fresher, and warmth is preserved. The difference between ground level and a few feet higher is stark, reminding you that adaptation here was measured in inches. Historians still argue over how much flood season altered daily life beyond farming. Some believe it was simply routine, accepted as part of the Nile's cycle, while others emphasize its disruptions, damp walls, ruined bedding, nights spent in discomfort. The debate remains, but the imagery endures. Egyptians adjusting their sleep just as they adjusted their fields, bending to the river's will. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking that even the act of sleep could not escape the Nile's control? The river gave life, but it also dictated rest. To live in Egypt was to submit to its cycles completely, eating, planting, praying, and even sleeping according to its floods. The cold nights of inundation season were harsher, heavier, but still endured with the same tools: mats, cloaks, canopies, and above all, adaptation. You pull your cover tighter now, imagining the smell of wet mud filling your chamber, the damp floor beneath your mat. Yet even in this discomfort, you know Egyptians endured. They raised themselves, dried their air, and leaned on each other. Survival was never about perfection. It was about persistence, season after season, night after night. And so, as the dawn creeps closer across flood-soaked fields, you marvel at the Egyptians' resilience. Their sleep was never separate from their river. It was part of the same eternal cycle, binding body, land, and night into one. The river recedes in your mind's eye, leaving behind fertile fields, but also new questions about what happens inside the body when cold strikes. For the Egyptians, surviving the night was not only about external tools, mats, cloaks, fires, or canopies. It was also about caring for the body itself. Diet, drink, and medicine shaped their resilience. The foods they ate by day, the herbs they brewed in the evening, even the remedies they trusted against chills, all determined how deeply they could sleep through the coldest desert hours. It is well documented that Egyptians consumed a diet rich in bread, beer, onions, and legumes. These foods provided not only calories but warmth. Bread and beer, staples of daily life, were dense with energy, fueling the body like internal fires. Imagine a worker finishing his evening meal: coarse bread baked from emmer wheat, a jug of beer thick like porridge, and perhaps a few onions or lentils. Such heavy meals filled stomachs and sustained heat through the night. Even without blankets, the furnace within the body burned strong. An unusual little tidbit comes from medical papyri, which describe remedies for chills and nighttime discomfort. Mixtures of honey, garlic, and herbs were prescribed, not only for health but to warm the chest. Some recipes called for heated beer infused with herbs, drunk before bed. The taste may have been bitter, but the effect was comforting, an ancient version of a bedtime tonic. Imagine lying down, belly full and warm from such a drink, the cold air outside less threatening because your body itself had become a hearth. There is lively debate among scholars about how widespread these practices were. Some argue that only the wealthy had access to complex herbal blends, while poorer villagers relied on simple beer and bread. Others suggest that even common folk knew how to brew warming remedies, using herbs gathered from fields and marshes. The truth likely lies in between. Elaborate mixtures in palaces, simple but effective brews in huts. Your senses lean into the scene. You taste the coarse bread, nutty and slightly sour, its crust hard but filling. You sip the thick beer, frothy and yeasty, leaving warmth in your belly. A faint sweetness lingers from honey mixed with garlic, pungent yet oddly soothing. The room smells of baked grain, onion skins, and fermenting jars, an aroma both earthy and sustaining. You lie back on your mat, your stomach full, and the warmth radiates outward, making the cold more bearable. Step into a noble's house. Evening meals here include roasted goose, figs, dates, and wines imported from the Delta. Rich foods build layers of fat and energy, insulating bodies through the night. Servants bring warm, spiced wine to bedchambers, and perfumed oils soothe skin before sleep. For elites, the combination of diet, oil, and ritual created both comfort and health, making cold nights less severe. Now step into a farmer's hut. Dinner is humbler. Flatbread baked on a clay griddle, beans boiled in a pot, and beer shared from a common jar. Yet even this modest meal provides warmth, filling bellies and staving off hunger's chill. Children lick the last crumbs from their fingers, their laughter softening the night. The family settles onto mats, their bodies fueled by the food that anchors them to life itself. An odd practice noted in some texts describes onions placed beneath pillows, believed to ward off illness and provide breath against chills. Whether symbolic or practical, The act reveals the blend of medicine and ritual in Egyptian sleep. The smell of onions in a dark room may not sound comforting today, but to them it carried reassurance, a guardian against unseen dangers. The sensory picture grows sharper. You feel the heaviness of food in your stomach, warmth spreading outward like slow-burning coals. You smell grain dust clinging to clothes, onions pungent in the air, honey sweet on your lips. Your eyelids grow heavy, lulled by both fullness and fatigue. The cold presses against the walls, but your body pushes back, its internal fire refusing to yield. Some specialists argue that Egyptian medicine exaggerated the effects of these remedies, that garlic or beer could not truly warm the chest. Others counter that the placebo effect, combined with caloric intake, genuinely made nights easier. Whether science or belief, the result was real enough. Families endured. Survival often rests not on perfect truth, but on useful habit. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking that warmth could be built from within as much as without? The Egyptians understood that survival was holistic. Walls, mats, cloaks, oils, and diet all played their roles. Sleep was not a single act but a carefully layered defense, built from everything life provided. You settle deeper into your cloak, belly warm from the imagined meal. The smell of onions drifts faintly. The taste of beer lingers. You close your eyes, comforted not just by what surrounds you, but by what sustains you within. And so, in the stillness of the desert night, you realize that the Egyptians' greatest fire was not the ember in a brazier or the cloak on their shoulders. It was the flame within their own bodies, fed by bread, beer, and the quiet rituals of nightly survival. The memory of bread and beer lingers warmly in your belly, but survival was never purely physical for the Egyptians. As you lie there in the dim chamber, another layer of defense emerges, not woven of reeds or spun from linen, but whispered in prayers and carved into amulets. For the ancient mind, the desert's cold was not only a natural force, it was also a shadowy presence, something spiritual to be resisted. And so, sleep was protected not just by cloth and fire, but by gods and rituals. We know from countless tomb finds that Egyptians placed amulets near beds and bodies. The Eye of Horus, symbol of protection and healing, was among the most common. At night, such tokens were believed to guard sleepers from illness and malevolent spirits. To hold one in your hand as you drifted off was to believe you were encircled by divine sight, invisible but strong. Imagine a child clutching such an amulet, its surface cool at first, then warming in their palm as slumber overtook them. An unusual little practice involved invoking Bez, the squat, leonine household god. His wide eyes, feathered headdress, and protruding tongue made him a fierce defender, particularly of sleep and childbirth. Figurines of Bez were placed in bedrooms, painted on headrests, or worn as pendants. Families believed his grotesque face frightened away demons of the night. Picture a small clay figurine grinning from a corner, watching over you as you huddled beneath linen and cloak. His presence was both humorous and terrifying, perfect for a god meant to keep nightmares away. Historians remain divided on whether these nightly rituals were universally practiced or primarily belonged to households with resources to afford amulets and figurines. Some argue that ordinary villagers improvised carving simple charms from wood or reciting prayers aloud. Others suggest that every household, regardless of wealth, found some way to invite divine guardianship into their sleep. The lack of written records from common homes leaves this question unresolved, though faith seems too widespread to have been absent in nightly routines. Your senses step into this sacred atmosphere. The room smells faintly of incense, juniper, or frankincense smoldered earlier in the evening, its aroma lingering like a veil. You touch a small amulet hanging near your mat, its surface smooth, its grooves faintly dusty. The lamplight flickers across it, casting long shadows of gods dancing on the walls. You hear whispers, soft prayers murmured by a mother over her children, words older than memory. Their cadence is gentle, like a lullaby, wrapping the room in comfort. Step into a noble's chamber. Here, amulets of gold and faience gleam on stands, and priests may have blessed the household with protective incantations. Painted walls show deities standing guard, and headrests are carved with protective figures. The air smells rich with incense, heavier and sweeter, filling lungs with reassurance. For these sleepers, divinity and wealth combine, making cold nights seem almost ceremonial. Now step into a farmer's hut. The amulet here may be nothing more than a clay scarab or a carved piece of wood, yet it carries the same weight of belief. A father hangs it from the wall, kisses it before sleep, and whispers a simple prayer. His children curl beneath his cloak, soothed not only by warmth but by faith that gods, however humble, are near. The hut smells of smoke and earth, but above it all hovers the quiet strength of belief. An odd tidbit comes from magical spells inscribed on papyri, some of which were tucked beneath pillows or mattresses. These dream spells were meant to ward off bad visions and invite good ones, ensuring peaceful rest. Imagine lying down knowing that a scroll beneath your head contained words of power, silent but potent, keeping the darkness at bay. The sensory picture intensifies. The faint glow of a lamp illuminates a painted image of Bez grinning fiercely on a headrest. The smell of incense clings to fabric, sweet and smoky. A child shifts, fingers closing around a scarab pendant, lips moving in unconscious repetition of a prayer taught by parents. The room feels warmer, not physically but emotionally insulated by the invisible presence of gods. Scholars still debate whether Egyptians truly believed spirits caused cold and illness, or whether such rituals were symbolic. Some argue that prayers and amulets worked as psychological comfort, easing minds into rest. Others maintain that for the Egyptians, the boundary between natural and supernatural was thin. To them, gods genuinely shaped the night. Perhaps both views are right. Belief itself can soften fear, and fear, once gone, makes the cold less cruel. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking how survival often requires more than the body? The Egyptians layered defenses of mind and spirit atop their physical tools. Where cloth ended, faith began. Where fire faded, prayers burned on. To sleep was to trust not only in walls and cloaks but in a cosmos filled with guardians. You pull the cloak tighter, fingers brushing a carved scarab tucked beneath your mat. The cold still lingers, but the fear recedes. In your ears, the echo of prayers becomes a lullaby. In your nostrils, incense lingers. In your heart, a sense of being watched over. And so, with gods and charms as companions, you drift once more into slumber, reminded that warmth can be woven not only from fibers, but from faith. The incense smoke fades, curling into the rafters, but you sense another kind of warmth, one created not by fabric or gods, but by the presence of animals. For Egyptians, animals were not only companions or symbols of divinity, they were also part of daily survival. At night, especially in poorer households, goats, sheep, or even cattle sometimes shared the same enclosure as their owners. Their bodies, heavy with breath and heat, became living radiators against the cold desert air. Archaeological studies of village layouts show that many houses were built with attached courtyards or side rooms for livestock. Mudbrick walls divided humans from animals by little more than a doorway or partition. In some cases, evidence suggests animals even shared the same chamber, their tethered forms resting on straw close to human mats. It was pragmatic. Warmth was conserved, predators were kept away, and valuable beasts remained safe. A curious detail emerges from depictions on ostraca and painted pottery. Goats and dogs appear curled beside people, almost as if part of the household family. While these images may be symbolic, they hint at a reality where animals, large and small, lay close during cold nights. Imagine stretching out on a reed mat, a goat pressed against your back, its musky smell pungent, but its heat undeniable. Specialists still debate how deliberate this co-sleeping was. Some argue it was necessity. Poor families had no choice but to share space with animals. Others suggest it may also have carried symbolic meaning, reflecting Egyptians' reverence for creatures tied to gods and fertility. Was it simply about warmth? Or did it also affirm the animal's sacred role in the household? The answer remains uncertain, though likely both. Your senses immerse in the scene. The air grows heavy with the smell of dung and hay, sharp and earthy, mingling with the aroma of oil lamps. You hear the steady chewing of a cow, the shuffle of hooves against straw, the faint bleat of a goat settling into rest. Heat radiates from their bodies, raising the room's temperature just enough to dull the desert's bite. Their breath clouds faintly in lamplight, joining the rhythm of human breathing. Step into a farmer's hut. His family sleeps along one wall, while 2 goats and a calf occupy the other. Children giggle before drifting to sleep, reaching out to stroke coarse hair. A mother hushes them, but even she smiles, knowing the animal's warmth will make the night easier. For these villagers, livestock were more than wealth. They were guardians of survival, sharing breath and heat under the same fragile roof. Now step into a noble's estate. Here, animals are kept in separate stables, yet even nobles may have brought prized dogs into their chambers. Dogs serve not only as hunting companions but as guardians, their warmth and loyalty valued in cold hours. Imagine a hound curled at the foot of a bed, ears twitching, eyes half closed, its body heat warming the air around its master's feet. Even elites found comfort in the closeness of animals. An odd tidbit appears in medical texts. Animal fat was sometimes applied to the skin as a warming ointment. Though less refined than perfumed oils, it served as another way animals contributed to nightly survival. From their warmth to their byproducts, livestock shaped the Egyptian ability to endure. The sensory picture grows sharper. You run your hand over coarse goat hair, its wiry texture scratching your palm. The smell of hay rises as animals shift, mixing with smoke and human scent until the air feels thick but alive. The warmth is unmistakable, a steady organic heat radiating in waves. In the silence, you hear both snores and low bleats, merging into one chorus of survival. Researchers continue to puzzle over whether animals inside homes posed health risks, spreading parasites or illness. Some argue that close cohabitation was risky, while others point out that in the calculus of survival, warmth outweighed danger. After all, the Egyptians thrived for millennia, suggesting that the balance worked well enough. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it remarkable that survival often demanded intimacy with every aspect of life? Children, gods, animals alike. To keep warm, Egyptians wove together not only reeds and fabrics but relationships. Everybody, whether human or beast, contributed to the fragile shield against night's chill. You roll onto your side, imagining a goat pressed close, its breath hot against your back, its smell earthy and strong. Children curl tighter under cloaks. A dog shifts near the door, ears alert even in sleep. Outside, the desert wind prowls, relentless. Inside, warmth lives, stitched together by humans and animals breathing side by side. And so, as your eyes grow heavy, you realize that the Egyptians' survival was built not on distance from the natural world, but on intimacy with it. They did not separate themselves from animals in the night. They welcomed their warmth, their presence, their companionship, and in that shared space, humanity and nature endured together. The air in the chamber grows warmer with the press of animals, but even their heat is not constant. Fires burn out, bodies shift, winds find cracks. Egyptians learned to extend warmth through another trick, layering space itself. They crafted rooms within rooms, niches and alcoves designed to reduce drafts and hold heat. Sleep, in this sense, was architecture as much as habit. Archaeological evidence from village houses at sites like Deir el-Medina reveals narrow sleeping alcoves, tucked away from main courtyards. These spaces, often with low ceilings, functioned almost like built-in shelters within larger homes. By reducing air volume and blocking drafts, they created microclimates warmer than open chambers. Imagine crawling into such a niche, its walls pressing close, its ceiling low but its air softer, held in place by mudbrick. A curious little discovery in some tomb models shows miniature rooms with raised edges, perhaps representations of sleeping alcoves. Scholars debate whether these were symbolic or practical depictions, but the idea is clear. Egyptians valued enclosed spaces for rest. To them, an alcove was not cramped but protective, a cocoon carved from clay. There is ongoing disagreement about whether such alcoves were standard in all households or reserved for those who could afford larger structures. Some argue that even modest homes had small niches built into walls, doubling as storage by day and sleeping spaces by night. Others suggest only wealthier families enjoyed specialized sleeping chambers, while poorer villagers simply clustered in the main room. The truth, as always, is likely mixed different classes solving the same problem with the materials they had. Your senses sink into one of these alcoves. The mud-brick walls radiate faint warmth from the day's sun, their texture rough beneath your fingertips. The ceiling hangs low enough that your breath rebounds, creating a subtle humidity that makes the air feel less dry. The smell is earthy, almost like baked clay mixed with smoke. You hear less wind here, the draft blocked by narrow entryways. The silence is thicker, pressing in until your heartbeat becomes the loudest sound. Step into a noble's estate. In such houses, alcoves could be larger, decorated with plaster, or painted motifs. Linen curtains might be drawn across their entrances, adding another barrier against drafts. Within, cushioned mats and perfumed pillows transformed a practical niche into something almost luxurious. The noble slept inside, not only warm, but surrounded by symbols of wealth and order. Now picture a craftsman's home. His alcove is smaller, barely wider than his body. He curls within it, children at his side, a single cloak spread over all. The space is simple but effective, the cold outside never fully enters. He sleeps pressed against mudbrick that his own hands shaped, comforted by the thought that his labor shelters his family even in darkness. An unusual detail. Some houses appear to have been designed with double doors or layered entryways, slowing the rush of wind into sleeping areas. Imagine passing through a main door, then pulling shut a reed mat or cloth behind it, creating two barriers instead of one. Each layer lessened the desert's intrusion. Architecture itself became a blanket. The sensory experience grows sharper. You crawl into the alcove, knees brushing against reed mats, shoulders nearly touching the walls. The space feels narrow, but your breath warms it quickly. The air smells faintly of dust and oil, but it is still. Your body relaxes, sensing the difference immediately. The cold no longer swirls across your skin, but lingers only at the edges. Specialists continue to debate whether these alcoves were consciously designed for warmth or simply emerged from the need to maximize space. Some insist the thermal benefits were intentional, while others suggest they were accidental advantages. Yet intention or not, the result was the same. Egyptians found warmth in the architecture of closeness. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking that humans across ages have sought to shrink the space around them for comfort? Today, you pull blankets close. Then, they built walls close. The principle is timeless. Warmth grows when the world narrows, when air is stilled, when space itself becomes intimate. You settle deeper into the imagined alcove. The walls hug you, the ceiling seems to bend low, and your breath lingers like a mist in the air. Outside, the desert spreads vast and merciless. But here the world has shrunk to a cocoon of clay. It is enough. The Egyptians knew this, knew that sometimes survival meant not grand monuments but small spaces, where cold was held at bay by nothing more than walls pressed close. And so, as your eyelids droop, you realize that survival in Egypt was built not only on ingenuity of materials but also on design. Every alcove, every curtain, every layered wall was a quiet triumph against the desert. They remind you that warmth is not always about fire or cloth, it can also be about the shape of space itself. The alcove cradles you with its narrow walls. But in the distance you hear another sound: footsteps on stone, echoes fading into silence. Not every Egyptian slept in mudbrick houses or simple huts. For those entombed in eternity, sleep was reimagined entirely. Tombs, built of stone and hidden deep in cliffs or sand, were designed to be eternal bedrooms. And though these spaces were for the dead, they reveal much about how the living thought of warmth, rest, and the eternal struggle against the cold of night. Archaeological evidence shows that tombs were stocked with beds, linens, and even headrests carved from stone, wood, or ivory. The dead were not laid to rest naked on slabs; they were furnished as though sleep continued beyond life. Elaborate coffins filled with wrappings, amulets, and scented resins mirrored the nightly routines of the living, magnified into permanence. Imagine lying within such a chamber, surrounded by offerings meant to keep you comfortable not for one night, but forever. A curious little discovery in some burial sites is the presence of bed legs shaped like lion paws or bull hooves. These were not functional for the dead, they were symbolic. To sleep on such beds was to rest on the strength of sacred animals, guardians against the cold void of eternity. Even in death, Egyptians sought warmth, safety, and companionship, albeit through symbols carved into stone. Historians remain divided over how much these tomb furnishings reflected actual daily life. Were the linens and beds inside tombs faithful reproductions of what the deceased used, or were they idealized, made more ornate for eternity? Some argue that tombs exaggerate, showing us luxury rather than reality. Others believe they preserve a snapshot of domestic practices otherwise lost to decay. The debate continues, but each side agrees on one point: sleep and warmth mattered so much that they became central to visions of the afterlife. Your senses step into a tomb chamber. The air is still, colder than any house, smelling of stone dust and resin. You run your hand across a carved headrest, smooth and unyielding beneath your palm. Linen shrouds lie stiff and brittle with age, but you imagine them once soft, perfumed with oils, wrapping the body like a cocoon. The flicker of your torch casts shadows across painted walls, images of gods offering protection, of families gathered, of beds draped with fine linens. Even here, in a place of death, the imagery of sleep is everywhere. Step into the tomb of a noble. Inside, his coffin is surrounded by chests of bedding, folded linens perfumed with cedar oil, amulets strung carefully among wrappings. His head rests on a carved ivory support, decorated with protective figures. He lies as though merely napping, waiting for dawn in the afterlife. The cold stone chamber cannot harm him, for warmth has been symbolically provided in every detail. Now imagine a simpler burial. A villager's grave may hold only a reed mat or a plain wooden coffin, perhaps a clay amulet tucked beside the body. Yet even here the logic persists. No one should enter eternity without something to keep them warm, some symbol of sleep to soften the long night ahead. Poverty altered the details, but never erased the principle. An unusual tidbit: resins used in embalming, such as myrrh and frankincense, were not only preservative but also aromatic. Their scents lingered for centuries, filling tombs with a faint sweetness long after the bodies turned to dust. It is as though the dead were wrapped not only in linen but also in fragrance, an invisible blanket meant to shield them against decay and perhaps even cold. The sensory imagery deepens. You smell the sharp sweetness of resin, heavy and cloying in the confined chamber. You see painted stars on ceilings, turning the tomb into a night sky. You touch stone, cold and smooth, but imagine it softened by cloth thousands of years ago. You hear silence so deep it feels like a sound of its own, pressing on your ears, the eternal stillness of the afterlife. Scholars still argue whether Egyptians feared the cold of death literally or symbolically. Was warmth in tombs meant to preserve comfort, or was it metaphorical, a shield against the chill of oblivion? Perhaps both. In a culture where the sun's daily rebirth was everything, cold darkness represented chaos. To insulate the dead was to promise they would wake again in eternal dawn. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking that Egyptians, so familiar with harsh desert nights, projected their struggles with cold and darkness into eternity itself? For them, to rest forever required the same protections as resting for one-night linens, oils, amulets, beds, gods. The small rituals of survival became the great symbols of immortality. You curl tighter beneath your cloak, imagining yourself in such a tomb. The walls close in, the ceiling painted with stars, the smell of resin wrapping you like a blanket. Outside, the desert wind still roams, but here inside, the silence feels absolute. Warmth becomes not only physical but eternal, preserved in the very idea of what it means to sleep. And so, as your eyelids lower once more, you realize that to the Egyptians, sleep was never just nightly rest. It was rehearsal for eternity. To endure the coldest desert nights was to practice for the greatest night of all, the sleep of death, where warmth, comfort, and safety would be needed just as much as in life. The tomb walls fade from your imagination, and once again you are back in the living world, listening to the sounds of a village bracing for another cold night. This time, you notice something different: the way families prepare before darkness falls. Sleep in Egypt was not a sudden act of collapse, but a process, a routine shaped by ritual, necessity, and the rhythms of daily life. The path to rest began long before heads touched mats. Archaeological records and ancient texts suggest that evenings followed a predictable cadence. Meals were finished before night deepened, animals were tethered or herded indoors, lamps were trimmed, and cloaks laid ready. Doors and shutters were closed, reed mats unrolled, and canopies drawn across beds. These small acts, repeated each evening, created structure, a nightly ritual that trained both body and mind to surrender to rest. A curious detail appears in some household inventories. Lamps and wicks were often stored near bedding, suggesting that people kept light close even as they lay down. A faint glow from oil lamps eased the fear of darkness and perhaps gave warmth, though minimal. Imagine a family huddled together, their faces lit by flickering amber light, the lamp sputtering gently as they whisper before sleep. The lamp was more than flame, it was companionship. Historians debate how rigid these routines were. Some argue that strict order defined Egyptian nights, rooted in ritual and religion. Others believe routines were more flexible, shaped by necessity, fires dying earlier in poor households, lamps burning longer in wealthy homes. What remains clear is that preparation mattered. Survival in the desert night depended on foresight. Your senses lean into these preparations. You hear the scrape of reed mats against floors, the hollow thump of clay jars placed carefully by the wall. You smell oil poured into lamps, sharp and nutty, its wick igniting with a hiss. You feel the scratch of straw as it is spread for animals, the cool weight of a cloak as it settles over your shoulders. Each action slows the day, softens the noise, and draws you closer to the silence of night. Step into a noble household. Servants scurry about, setting beds with layered linens, adjusting canopies, and perfuming the air with incense. A platter of dried figs and wine is placed within reach, should the master wake. A nurse hums softly to children, their beds tucked behind curtains embroidered with protective symbols. The scene glows with wealth, but beneath it lies the same essence: readiness for the cold, preparedness for rest. Now step into a villager's hut. Here, the preparation is humbler, but no less meaningful. A mother gathers her children beneath a single cloak. The father checks the door's latch, then banks the courtyard fire, carrying a pot of embers inside. The room smells of smoke, hay, and warm bread crusts saved from dinner. Lamps are scarce, so shadows deepen quickly, but the routine itself comforts them. Even without luxury, ritual creates peace. An odd tidbit recorded in some magical texts mentions reciting specific phrases at bedtime, short invocations asking for protection against scorpions, snakes, and spirits. These nightly formulas were as much habit as prayer. Spoken softly, they became part of the rhythm of preparation, no different than laying a mat or closing a door. For Egyptians, words themselves carried heat, banishing fear the way a cloak banished cold. The sensory picture sharpens. You hear the low murmur of voices, their cadence soothing. The lamplight paints golden streaks across mudbrick walls, then flickers out as oil burns low. The smell of incense lingers faintly, mixing with sweat, animals, and grain. The night air presses against the door, testing its seams, but inside the room order and ritual stand guard. Specialists still wonder how much of these routines were instinct and how much were cultural teachings. Did every parent pass down the same preparations, or did habits vary from village to village? Some suggest strong regional differences, others see universal patterns shaped by climate. Either way, the consistency of evidence shows that nightly preparation was central, perhaps as important as the bedding itself. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking that survival often rests not only on what you own but on what you do? The Egyptians survived cold nights not simply through objects, mats, cloaks, canopies, but through repeated actions that created rhythm and calm. Their lives remind you that routine itself can be a form of warmth. Predictability shelters the mind, and a sheltered mind rests easier against the body's fears. You pull your cloak closer, hearing the last whispers of preparation fade. The lamp sputters, casting one final glow before dark. The room stills, breathing deepens, silence settles. Everything is ready, and readiness itself feels like protection. You close your eyes, marveling at how simple acts, rolling mats, trimming lamps, whispering words could transform a harsh desert night into something survivable, even peaceful. And so, as you drift, you understand that survival in Egypt was never just a matter of invention or wealth. It was a matter of ritual small acts repeated until they became armor, until night itself bent before the strength of habit. The household falls silent after the evening rituals, yet you realize that silence itself was not always complete. Night in Egypt was filled with sounds, both natural and human, that shaped how people slept. The cold may have pressed in from outside, but it was softened or sometimes sharpened by the soundscape surrounding each sleeper. To understand how Egyptians endured their nights, you must also listen to what they heard as they drifted toward dreams. We know from ancient writings and modern reconstructions that Egyptian villages at night were far from quiet. Donkeys brayed in courtyards, dogs barked at unseen movements, and roosters sometimes crowed at odd hours. Livestock shuffled restlessly, and in reed-thick marshlands, frogs croaked in steady chorus. Imagine lying on a reed mat, pulling a cloak tight against the cold, while the soundtrack of the Nile hummed around you. These noises were not distractions, they were reassurance. They meant life surrounded you, that you were not alone in the dark. A curious little detail emerges from lullaby fragments preserved on ostraca. Some songs mention animals directly, soothing children by naming dogs, cattle, or birds outside. The rhythm of the environment was folded into song, transforming potentially startling noises into gentle reminders of safety. A dog's bark became a guardian, a frog's croak, a lullaby. To drift off beneath such reframed sounds was to rest more peacefully. Scholars debate how much noise intrusion disrupted sleep. Some argue that communal living and shared walls meant constant disturbance, making rest fragmented. Others suggest the opposite, that people adapted, finding comfort in shared soundscapes, their brains attuned to ignore familiar noises. The lack of private bedrooms meant no silence, but perhaps also no loneliness. Your senses lean into this nocturnal orchestra. You hear the steady bleat of a goat nearby, the shifting creak of rope as animals move in their stalls. A dog barks sharply, then quiets after a moment, its sound muffled by mudbrick. In the distance, the faint rush of Nile water carries a cool freshness into the night air. The smell of animals, reeds, and faint smoke fills your nostrils, layered with the sweet tang of oil. Each sound folds into the next, until the night feels like a woven fabric of survival. Step into a noble's villa. Here, sounds are fewer but not absent. Servants whisper in corners, Oil lamps hiss softly, and trained hounds patrol courtyards, their paws padding against stone. Outside the walls, palm trees creak as winds shift, and the Nile murmurs faintly in the distance. Even in luxury, the noble drifts off not in silence but in sound, a tapestry of murmurs that assures him the world beyond his chamber continues to turn. Now step into a farmer's hut. His night is noisier. Children cough in sleep, goats shuffle, hens cluck softly, and neighbors' voices carry through thin walls. The roof creaks as wind pushes against it, and embers crackle in a clay pot nearby. It is chaotic, yet oddly soothing, each sound a reminder of survival, of bodies and beasts living together against the cold. An odd tidbit comes from certain dream incubation practices tied to temples. Worshippers seeking divine visions deliberately slept in sacred spaces filled with chanting or the cries of animals offered in ritual. For them, noise was not a hindrance but a pathway, believed to open the soul to divine messages. Nighttime soundscapes in this context were portals as much as backdrops. The sensory scene sharpens. You lie on your mat, half asleep, your ears catching every detail. The snap of a twig outside, the rattle of reeds in the breeze, the faint croak of frogs, the sigh of someone turning beside you. None of it feels hostile. Instead, it is a reminder that life persists even in the darkest hours. Cold may gnaw, but sound assures you that warmth of breath, of company remains. Specialists still argue whether the Egyptians feared night noises as omens or embraced them as natural. Some texts warn against spirits in the dark, while others speak tenderly of animals calling in the night. Perhaps interpretation depended on context. A dog's bark near home was protection, but an unexplained cry in the desert was danger. What is certain is that Egyptians lived intimately with their environment, every sound folded into their nightly experience. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking how warmth can be psychological as much as physical? To lie in a room alive with sound is to feel sheltered, surrounded by other beings sharing the same struggle. The desert outside is silent, merciless, but inside the house or village, noise itself becomes a kind of insulation, a buffer against loneliness and fear. You pull the cloak tighter, listening. A goat sighs. A child murmurs in sleep. Somewhere, a rooster crows too early, confused by the lamplight. You smile faintly, realizing that Egyptians long ago smiled at the same small absurdities. Their nights, like yours, were imperfect, noisy, restless but survivable. And so, as your eyelids lower, you understand that the Egyptians' nights were not ruled by silence. They were ruled by sound, constant, layered, imperfect, yet deeply human. And in those sounds, warmth was found, enough to carry families through the coldest of desert hours. The night sounds swirl around you, but eventually even those fade into the steady hum of sleep. Yet not all sleep was the same. Egyptians recognized rhythms within the night, cycles of light and shadow, moments of deep rest and sudden waking. To them, sleep was not a single stretch but a pattern, shaped by moonlight, dreams, and even the call of duties at odd hours. Understanding how they navigated these rhythms adds another layer to how they endured the cold. We know from ancient texts and comparative studies that segmented sleep was common in early societies. Egyptians likely followed a pattern of first sleep and second sleep, divided by a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night. In those hours, people might stoke fires, check on animals, or whisper prayers before lying back down. Such interruptions were not seen as unusual. They were part of the natural rhythm of life without artificial lighting. An unusual detail comes from dream texts that describe rituals performed at night. Priests or ordinary sleepers sometimes sought visions in the hours between sleeps, believing this liminal time was closer to the divine. Imagine a family stirring when embers die down. The father rises to feed coals into a pot. The mother adjusts a cloak over a child, and then perhaps both sit for a few moments whispering about dreams before sleep returns. The coldest hours of night were punctuated by these brief awakenings, survival routines woven seamlessly into spiritual reflection. Historians still debate whether segmented sleep was truly universal in Egypt. Some argue that evidence is too circumstantial, borrowed from other ancient cultures. Others point to consistent references in papyri, graffiti, and temple texts as proof that waking during the night was expected. The absence of continuous artificial light, they argue, made such rhythms inevitable. The discussion continues, but the logic is persuasive. Your senses step into such a night. You wake in darkness, your breath visible in the chill. The room is quiet, save for the crackle of coals fading in the brazier. You hear someone stirring, a child muttering in half-sleep, a goat shifting on straw. The air smells faintly of smoke and sweat. You sit up, adjusting your cloak, feeling the cold bite more sharply now. For a moment, you rub oil into your hands, muttering a short prayer, then settle back under your cover. Sleep will come again soon, it always does. Step into a noble's chamber. Here, attendants wait in silence, ready to trim wicks or bring fresh embers if their master wakes. If he cannot return to sleep, he may sip spiced wine or dictate a note to a scribe. The luxury of wakefulness becomes another opportunity for ritual or command. For elites, even sleeplessness was transformed into ceremony. Now step into a farmer's hut. He wakes because the cold has slipped into his bones. He rises, stirs the coals in a pot, blows gently until they glow brighter. He checks on animals, adds a layer of straw beneath them, then returns to his mat. His wife shifts to make space. Children grumble but curl back against his warmth. This interruption, though small, makes the second half of the night survivable. A quirky tidbit survives in records of dream incubation, temple rituals where people deliberately slept in sacred spaces, hoping for visions. The time between first and second sleep was thought especially potent for such dreams. To them, waking in the cold darkness was not inconvenience but opportunity, a moment when the barrier between human and divine grew thin. The sensory detail sharpens. You feel the cool floor beneath your feet as you rise, the rush of air biting your skin when the blanket slips away. You smell faint ash from dying embers, hear the faint creak of reed mats as others shift in sleep. The silence is vast, but you are not alone. Life breathes softly all around you. You return to your cloak, pulling it over your head, and warmth slowly builds again. Specialists continue to argue whether Egyptians described these rhythms consciously, or whether they were so ordinary that no one thought to write them down. Perhaps what seems unusual to modern minds was unremarkable to them. To wake in the middle of the night was as natural as breathing. It was simply part of life's rhythm, shaped by darkness, climate, and necessity. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking how survival often aligns with nature's own cadence? Egyptians did not fight their interrupted sleep. They flowed with it. They accepted wakefulness as a time to tend embers, check children, whisper prayers, or simply lie still. Cold was endured not by uninterrupted rest, but by weaving wakefulness into the fabric of night. You sink back now into your mat, heart slowing, eyelids heavy once more. The first sleep has passed, the second begins. Outside, the desert wind prowls, but inside, bodies shift closer, cloaks are pulled tighter, embers glow faintly. In these rhythms, sleep, wake, sleep the Egyptians endured, finding balance between cold and comfort, between darkness and dawn. And so, as you drift again, you realize that survival was not about conquering night but harmonizing with it. They let the desert's rhythms shape their own, and in that surrender found resilience that carried them through the coldest hours. The cycle of first sleep and second sleep drifts into memory, and now you feel the faint glow of dawn teasing the edges of the night. The cold still lingers, heavy and sharp, but you know it will not last. Soon the sun will rise over the desert horizon, flooding the Nile Valley with heat once more. For the Egyptians, each morning after a bitter night was not only relief, it was proof of survival. They had endured again, and endurance was everything. We know from countless inscriptions and hymns that the rising sun was the most sacred moment of the day. Egyptians worshipped Ra's rebirth every morning, celebrating his victory over the darkness of night. This cosmic struggle mirrored their own nightly ordeal. Just as Ra fought chaos to bring the dawn, so too did families fight cold, wind, and fear to reach morning light. When the first rays struck, it was both spiritual triumph and physical salvation. An unusual little detail comes from household routines at daybreak. Families often lit fires again, not only for cooking but for warmth, boiling water for bread dough, or brewing beer. The smoke of new flames filled the air, chasing away the dampness of night. Children stirred, animals bleated, and villages awakened with a kind of collective sigh. Imagine stretching stiff limbs beneath a cloak, the smell of baking bread drifting in as morning fires caught. The cold retreats not suddenly but steadily, step by step with each ember reignited. Historians still discuss whether Egyptians truly feared night as a force of chaos or simply accepted it as part of life. Some texts describe night as dangerous, filled with demons and chill, while others portray it as restorative, a time when the body healed. Was dawn relief from terror, or simply return to order? The debate remains unresolved, though perhaps for Egyptians it was both a duality they embraced without contradiction. Your senses step into this dawn. You smell smoke rising from courtyard fires, sweetened with the aroma of grain baking. You feel your cloak grow lighter as the air warms, no longer heavy with chill. The sky shifts from black to indigo to gold, painted with colors sharp against the desert's edge. You hear the cry of roosters, louder now, joined by donkeys braying and children laughing as they chase each other in morning light. Step into a noble's villa at sunrise. Servants open shutters, letting in fresh air scented with lotus and morning dew. The master stretches on his rope bed, attendants bringing warm water to wash away the stiffness of night. Perfumed oils are rubbed onto skin, erasing the dryness of cold. For elites, dawn was not only relief but ritual renewal, the promise of another day to rule, feast, and pray. Now step into a farmer's hut. The father rises early, stoking embers into flame, while his wife kneads dough with hands still stiff from cold. Children scamper barefoot, shaking straw from their hair. The hut smells of earth and smoke, but also of bread, life, and warmth returning. The family thanks the gods not with grand hymns but with simple breath, a sigh of gratitude that night has passed without harm. A quirky tidbit lies in morning hymns recited to Ra. Some contained phrases thanking him for warmth specifically, as if acknowledging not only cosmic order, but physical comfort. To rise in the dawn was to feel the sun's heat seep into bones, banishing the memory of icy desert air. Morning was not abstract, it was tangible, sensual, felt in skin and breath. The sensory image deepens. You feel the sun's warmth creep across your body, first gentle, then insistent, drying the night's dampness from linen. You hear the clatter of pots, the laughter of neighbors, the bark of dogs chasing each other in courtyards. You smell bread rising, oil sizzling, and the faint perfume of flowers opening along riverbanks. Cold is gone, replaced by the embrace of heat, light, and noise. Scholars still debate how much Egyptians reflected consciously on this daily cycle. Did they marvel each morning at their survival, or did it become ordinary? Perhaps both. For farmers, dawn was routine, but for priests, it was sacred ceremony. For nobles, it was indulgence. For children, excitement. Yet across all classes, the truth was shared. The night had passed, the sun had returned, and life continued. Reflect for a moment. Isn't it striking how every strategy, mats, cloaks, alcoves, animals, oils, prayers, was aimed at one simple goal: to last until morning? Egyptians did not conquer the desert night. They endured it, layer by layer, breath by breath, until the sun's rebirth delivered them again. Their survival was never guaranteed, yet it was constant, repeated for millennia. You open your eyes, feeling dawn's warmth wash over you. The desert outside glitters in golden light, no longer hostile but radiant. Families rise, fires smoke, children laugh. The night has ended, and with it, the trial of cold. Egyptians knew this rhythm well. Darkness and chill, endurance and dawn. It was the heartbeat of their existence, tying them to gods, to river, to earth. And so, as the last stars fade, you understand their secret. They did not have gas, electricity, or modern comforts. What they had was resilience woven into mats, cloaks, fires, oils, rituals, and above all, community. They faced the coldest desert nights not with despair but with ingenuity, faith, and each other. And in doing so, they not only survived, they thrived. Now, dear listener, the story softens. You have walked through mudbrick houses and noble villas, crouched in alcoves and temples, felt reeds beneath your cheek and oils on your skin. You have heard goats bleat, children murmur, and lamps sputter in the silence. You have endured the long, cold nights of the Egyptian desert, side by side with those who lived thousands of years ago. And yet, here you are, safe, warm, drifting at the edge of sleep. Let the details blur now, the mats, the cloaks, the sacred charms. Imagine instead only the rhythm of breath, slow and steady, filling a room where family rests together. The night outside is endless, but it cannot enter. Inside, warmth gathers, not from fire alone, but from closeness, ritual, and resilience. Breathe deeply. Feel the weight of linen or blanket over your shoulders. Hear, in your imagination, the distant lap of the Nile, soft as a lullaby. See the first hint of dawn spilling gold over desert sands, promising that the coldest hours are always followed by light. Let your body loosen. The struggles of ancient people are no longer yours to bear. They have carried you this far, teaching you their quiet wisdom, that survival comes in small acts, repeated patiently, until night gives way to morning. You can release those burdens now. The desert wind fades, the lamp dims, the warmth holds. And with that, you may let yourself drift deeper, softer, into your own sleep. Sweet dreams.